Being here. Welcome to our 56th annual meeting of the Morongo Basin Conservation Association. Wow. My name is Steve Bardwell, and I'm pleased to serve as president of the Morongo Basin Conservation Association, MBCA. What does MBCA do? In a nutshell, a lot. Our mission is to advocate and educate for a healthy desert environment which nurtures wildlands and supports our community's rural character, economic well-being, and culture. Before we proceed, allow me to introduce and thank the longest inhabitants of these desert lands, the Serrano, Kemehueve, Mojave, and Cahuilla people, and the Colorado River Indian tribes, who have lands in California and Arizona. Through our mission, we honor and support their long stewardship of these lands. We offer our thanks to the town of Yucca Valley Parks and Recreation and staff of Andy, Edward, and Ryan were real helpful in facilitating today's meeting. And a thank you also to Terry Quinn, who is catering today's food, and to Bob Stevenson, who's helping us videotape this meeting here today. Thanks so much. And we appreciate our vendors, Solar Now of Yucca Valley, and I think we have some people from Renova here, if they're supposed to be here. But thank you for their, please visit them at the back of the room. I know Solar Now would love to, they'd love to speak with you. Excuse me. At this time, I'd like to ask all of our board members to please stand. Our Vice President, Stacy Doolittle, in the back here with a big love. Our Secretary, Lorraine Turk, here. Our Treasurer, Bob Wald. That's Bob. Our past President, Sarah Kennington. David Fick. Thank you, David. Pat Flanagan. Brian Hammer, back here. Janet Johnston. Alan Songer. And Arch McCullough, who I think wasn't able to make it today, he's got a bug. We're glad you're all here and invite you to join us sometime for our monthly meetings, which are held on the second Thursday of the month between 4 and 6 o'clock. You may attend either in person or by Zoom. Please email us if you want to receive the meeting link and agenda every month. Our meeting agenda. Yeah, wow. Our meeting agendas are often full with discussions on a wide variety of issues, including the many effects of our warming and changing climate, for one. Development pressures here contrast and conflict with the ongoing decline of our local species, the desert tortoise, the western Joshua tree, and the just designated as candidate for threatened species, the burrowing owl. The Morongo Basin provides valuable wildlife corridors critical to conserving and helping wildlife prosper. Wildlife corridors must be recognized and respected in development proposals and wildlife crossings facilitated. The Sand to Snow Monument is effectively severed by Highway 62 in Morongo Valley, which has a deadly impact to animals, including thirsty bears. We must and we will do better on that. Board members work hard, and it's not easy to capture all that we do. We have been involved in California's 30 by 30 effort via participation in the Inland Deserts Working Group, as well as advocating for the successful designation of Chuckwalla and Satitla National Monuments. We are so pleased to have a new neighbor, Chuckwalla National Monument, right? The working group published a compelling paper in which we had a big hand, describing the role of California's deserts in sequestering carbon and supporting biodiversity. The report shows that when scraping our intact desert for renewable energy development, in addition to destroying habitat, the carbon is released, ongoing carbon sequestration is halted, and unhealthful dust is released. That last video you saw was from just a few days ago, just a terrible dust storm from the scraped desert. So really something we are trying to keep an eye on and bring awareness to. As recommended in the report, we are heartened to learn that the nation's largest warehouse, 3.4 million square feet, the nation's biggest warehouse, now under construction in Desert Hot Springs, will have solar panels on its roof. We're really glad. That was really a big win on that thing. It was through the efforts of people down in the lower desert that really advocated with Desert Hot Springs for that. So this is good. The report I'm speaking of is available on mbconservation.org, and we're trying to get it as broadly distributed as possible because it's really important. MBCA strongly supports the imperative to transition to clean, renewable energy. MBCA continues to call for the placement of needed utility-scale projects on disturbed, degraded, or brownfield sites and within the built environment close to their point of use. The seesaw of water, too much, too little, continues in the state of California. Southern California is now back in a state of drought. MBCA continues to track the efforts of the Cadiz Corporation to export water from the Mojave Desert for use in other portions of the state at an extraordinary profit. I am pleased to report these efforts have been currently blocked by the State Lands Commission, across whose land the water would need to be transported. Stay tuned, we're going to keep tracking that. As with the entire state, the apparent never-ending string of devastating wildfires is on the minds of members of our board as they work to form a fire-wise community in portions of the Morongo Basin. The devastating fires in the San Bernardino Mountains of the past 2 years have severely affected and reduced wildlife habitat. We must remember our deserts are not immune from fire, and we encourage everyone to practice wildfire awareness and harden and create defensible space around their home. This year will mark the 15th year of our Desert-Wise Living Landscape series. Funding for this popular program is provided by the local water agencies as well as the Mojave Water Agency. This tour focuses on the unique character of the high desert environment and stresses the importance of employing water-wise, energy-smart, and native plant materials. Sites are all vetted for water use. The in-person tour will be held this year on Sunday, April 27th. It's a very popular tour, and I hope you'll mark your calendars and be there. This year's tour will also include virtual video tours of sites, and instructional how-to videos, similar to the one we just opened with here. I encourage you to please explore the many productions on our YouTube channel and become a subscriber to our YouTube channel. We are pleased to report our videos have been viewed tens of thousands of times, which indicates the continuing interest in desert-wise living strategies. Thanks to our Desert Wise Living Committee and volunteers for their work and time in these productions, and a special shout out to our filmmaker Cole Gibson, and also to Miriam Seeger, who has been really instrumental in this thing. MBCA continues to be a trusted source to evaluate development proposals within the unincorporated portions of the county. With the repeal of all community plans throughout the county and the turnover of land use services staff, institutional memory has been effectively erased. Both of these issues are problematic for us here in the Morongo Basin. There is a need for comprehensive and informed planning for the high desert. Lack of on-the-ground familiarity makes it difficult to promote awareness with concerns over specific developments in specific areas. The county over the last year has begun subcontracting many of their land use services out. There's not a director of planning any longer. It's all subcontracted out. So the ongoing trend of subcontracting has hit our county really hard. The current countywide plan is based on the assumptions that there will be little growth within the high desert, but there is continuing pressure for growth. And yet these visions, yes, the vision regarding the limited, yet there's little vision regarding the limited infrastructure and lack of housing. We have been continuing to call for a update of the countywide zoning maps, which at the moment are not in sync with the county land use map. The county was very pleased and proud about putting everything in a digital format, but they haven't gone to the extent now of updating everything. They've got the land use map updated, but not the zoning map. There was just this last week, the Planning Commission approved a housing development in Joshua Tree. They didn't solicit no notification to, very limited notification to the local community about this. And there is some questions about some inconsistency between the land use map and the zoning map upon which this approval was granted. The planned Barstow International Gateway, known as BIG, will create a 4,000-acre railway hub for the distribution of goods in Barstow. We are concerned this will have severe impacts on traffic on Highway 247. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that Scenic 247 will soon be designated a scenic highway, thanks to efforts from some of the people here in this room, Sarah, and the Homestead Valley Community Council. The county's draft long-range multimodal transportation plan does not address this issue of additional traffic. The plan, however, does anticipate significant growth in the Morongo Basin. This is at odds with other growth projections to which we strive to bring awareness. Prior to its dissolution, the Morongo Basin Advisory Council, known as the MAC, provided an effective forum for the public to participate in county decision-making and gather public input. We continue to ask that the MAC be reinstated. This would be it was a good forum, always brought people out, and you could really see what was happening on a regular basis. MBCA provided substantive comments to the Bureau of Land Management's Western Mojave Off-Road Vehicle Management Plan, known as WEMO. Destruction caused by unauthorized OHVs on our fragile desert can be severe and essentially permanent. The Center for Biological Diversity challenged this plan, and a federal judge agreed, rejecting the WEMO as not having adequately considered the effect of the routes on wildlife and the environment. We're pleased to have had, this was brought to our attention in the news media, and subsequently Steve Jerstad, who's in attendance here today, has brought a lot of attention to this as well. We're continuing to track this because we put a lot of energy into that when it was first, the WEMA was first established. The Morongo Basin treasures our dark night sky. The county light trespass ordinance, something we worked very hard on to have employed, is now in effect for all unincorporated desert communities. Exterior lighting must now be shielded, of a warm tone, and subject to modern methods of measurement. We encourage you to contact code enforcement to report violations. If they don't respond the first time, contact them again. Also encourage you to get in touch with our supervisor's field representative, and Glenn Harris, and let him know as well if you're having difficulty with that. Join MBCA board members for a dark sky lighting workshop to be held on February 7th at the Copper Mountain Mesa Community Center. We hope to see you there. Through our widely viewed video production, MBCA helped to bring awareness to the effects of short-term rentals on our desert communities and the displacement they caused. MBCA challenged the adoption of the housing element of the countywide plan, contending that STRs did have an effect on the availability of housing. Last year, after considerable delay, a report was accepted by the county acknowledging that in the community of Joshua Tree, STRs were having an impact. The Board of Supervisors, their remedy for this impact, get this, was to augment existing affordable housing programs, we like that, consider new affordable housing strategies. As of now, there has been no evidence of any movement on these things. It just not great. Meanwhile, the STR boom has gone bust. STRs are now coming onto the market at prices, lower prices, and the STRs have really affected what's known as the naturally occurring affordable housing that our communities did have. So it's, the demand for STRs has plummeted. So it's like, okay, the market worked it out and we're left to pick up the pieces. The Basin is not immune from the housing crisis affecting the country. Janet Johnston, MBCA's housing advocate, has recently been elected to the East Desert Regional Steering Committee to advise on homeless housing issues. Go Janet, yay. MBCA looks forward to participating in the creation of a housing solutions working group to explore housing solutions in the Basin. 2025 will mark the second year MBCA has coordinated field trips for 8th grade students from La Contenta Middle School. Led by business owners, scientists, park rangers, authors, artists, architects, and outdoor enthusiasts, these field trips are designed to expose students to a variety of activities to broaden their experiences and help them envision options for their future endeavors. This year will mark the 8th year of MBCA's awarding of scholarships to college-bound high school students from the Morongo Basin. We are pleased to support the next generation as they pursue their educational goals. In 2024, we are gratified to award 3 $1,000 scholarships to Cassidy Albrecht, who is attending UCLA studying astrophysics after being inspired by the dark night skies of the Morongo Basin, and to Caden Beasley, who is now attending Grand Canyon University studying engineering, where he is inspired to conserve resources for the benefit of future generations. And Sunny Duran, who is studying environmental sciences at Copper Mountain College, to become a steward of the natural world for the benefit of humanity. Wow, this is really fantastic. So please consider joining and supporting MBCA as we pursue our mission. With the new administration creating such turbulence and with such radical changes, it's important for us to all keep our eye on the prize and not be distracted by the noise around us. I encourage us all to let's strive to maintain our positivity and gather strength from our community. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce Bernadette Del Chiaro. Bernadette is the Executive Director of the California Solar and Storage Association. CALSA is the acronym. They're keeping their eye on the prize of a distributed, clean, carbon-free, renewable energy future. Bernadette? Great, thank you.
Putting on a timer so I'm long-winded, so you can just get your cane out, Steve. Thank you so much, Steve, and also thank you, Sarah, for hosting us, inviting us and hosting us. My husband and I had the wonderful opportunity of coming in yesterday, getting to see Pipes Canyon, and going for a hike, and just being in the desert for even 24 hours is a blessing. So thank you so much for having us. Yeah, my name is Bernadette Del Chiaro, and I am the Executive Director of the California Solar and Storage Association. I'll tell you a little bit more about CALSA if you're not familiar with us in a second, but just a little bit more about me. I'm a lifelong, like you, environmentalist. I got bit by the bug back when I was 14 years old, and I just realized my world expanded, and I just realized that humans were having a negative effect on our beautiful planet, no matter where you go. And most importantly, though, at this age and at this time, I also realized that we all could do something about it. And there was this thing called activism. And I thought, that is wonderful. That's what I'm going to do. So I went to university, specifically like some of these scholarship recipients, to study how do we humans work together to do something about the myriad environmental problems we were causing. Right out of college, I had the opportunity to spend a year in Ward Valley. Anybody here part of the Ward Valley fight to stop the nuclear waste dump back in the 90s? I played one small part of helping staff up a community outreach office in Needles after the company that was trying to build an unlined dirt trench nuclear waste dump just a few miles from the Colorado River, just outside of Needles, opened up their own community office, outreach office, and they were trying to tell the folks of Needles and Kingman and the other Laughlin and the other towns nearby that this was totally benign, totally safe, and that our cities and hospitals need the desert to become the dumping ground for radioactive waste. And so my job was to go and present a counter message. I had an incredible time living in the desert and really experiencing just how beautiful the desert is, and that it's worth every bit of activism that you do to protect it. So when Steve invited me, I was like, I'm going to go hang with desert activists that I love and help protect the desert. And just more importantly, I'm going to share a bunch of information. A bunch of you already know this. So as I was joking around with Steve and Sarah yesterday, it's, you could kind of be cynical and go, we're just, preaching to the choir. But I see it actually more as I'm hopefully collectively together, we're arming the angels. We're the angels out there working to protect our planet. So hopefully this information, to the extent that you already know it, and hopefully some stuff is new, it just helps us all collectively fight together. My husband and I, Steve, we moved to Sacramento 23 years ago, and we did it to take one for the team, I always joke, because we specifically moved to the largest state's the capital of the largest state in this country. And we did that strategically. We believe in this country, at least, we're going to make the most change, at least, if not at the local level, at the state level. And so people need to go to Sacramento to help advocate for the planet and for the earth. And if we can't do it in Sacramento and in California, we can't do it anywhere. And so California leads the way, but we can also drag the effort down, and that's what's happening right now at least with regards to rooftop solar. We're anti-leaders right now, and we're seeing states all around the country, unfortunately, follow suit. So we need to get our act together fast. I currently, and for the past 11 years, 12 years, I run the state trade association called the California Solar and Storage Association. Before that, I worked for environmental groups, including Environment California. CALSA is the oldest and largest clean energy business group. It's been around for over 40 years, and we exclusively represent the distributed side of the solar industry. We're very unique in that way, in that we just work on, I call it rooftop, as you all know. There's lots of ground-mounted systems, but I call it rooftop just to keep it simple for people of what we're talking about is the distributed side, the solar that's for the customer. I want to thank Renova for coming and Solar Now. Renova is a member of CALSA, and there are 700 other companies across the state that are members of our trade association. And collectively, we can have a big impact by working together, but ultimately, collectively, with our environmental allies like you as well. So the presentation I have, I'm going to try to present three different kind of subjects. One is just why solar energy is important and why distributed specifically is important in California. This is the stuff you already know, but hopefully there'll be a little bit more information to make it useful to be here. But I'm going to also attempt to answer the question, why is rooftop solar under attack? Like, why is there so much negativity, and why are we moving backwards? And I think I have some really interesting pieces of information to share with you on that front. And then lastly, I hope to debunk the cost shift. This is one of the major messages that have been put forward, that we need to slow down rooftop solar. We need to even change to the net metering 1.0 and 2.0 contracts, clawback savings from solar users in order to avoid, hurting other people that don't have solar. So I'm going to unpack that myth and show you why it is so absolutely false, and then hopefully call to action of what can we do going forward. Some of you, anybody familiar with the Solar Rights Alliance? I see a package. Okay, we work very closely together, so some of this information is stuff that we've put together collectively in a presentation, but like I said, hopefully there's new stuff, and for me, I can't hear this stuff enough. It feels like going over it more than once is really helpful. Okay, so that's my backdrop. Let's go to the first slide. Okay, so rooftop solar is essential to meeting California's clean energy goals. The California Energy Commission has estimated that the state of California needs, and bear with me on the units, some of you might know what a watt is, and a kilowatt, and a megawatt, and a gigawatt, but just, I think the concept is there. We need 130 gigawatts of solar energy by 2045 to meet the state's clean energy goals, 130. We have built to date 36, and that's utility scale and rooftop combined. Okay, so all of that solar we have built, all of this progress over the past 20 years, and we are nowhere close to the finish line. And I might add, 2045, most scientists say that's actually too long of a timeline. We really need to meet our clean energy goals by 2035, right? That's what most scientists say. So we really need to get to that finish line there super fast. And 40% of California's solar installed to date is distributed. So it is not some small little side dish, that means doesn't amount to anything. We have 16 gigawatts of rooftop solar in California. That's the equivalent of 8 nuclear power plants. It's an absolute phenomena of the public stepping forward. I'm sure many of you in the room have been leaders in this, but collectively, what we can do together is really phenomenal, and it's a critical part of our market. And we can't get to that 130 without it. We just can't. So that's number one. Next slide. The other thing I want to just say to every single person I meet, rooftop solar isn't just for one type of demographic. If you're in Sacramento and you just polled the average politician and their staff member, they would have all been told for years now, rooftop solar is only for rich, white, wealthy people, mostly coastal dwellers. It's absolutely not true. This is data from the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, And they got permit-specific data, so it's address-specific, it's not just zip code. And they matched it up with tax data, income data. And what they found, it's hard for you all to read it here, but we will make these slides available, that 60%, in 2023, 60% of all solar adopters were people who were in the low working class or moderate income range. Everybody earned $150,000 or less of a family income. And you can see the tallest bar are families that make under $100K. That's not wealthy. And then 52% of the solar adopters in 2023 are families of color. Okay? Solar is not only for the wealthy, white, rich. And that's important because as we unpack this whole attack on rooftop solar, this is like pouring fuel on the fire, that myth that it's only for a certain demographic. And it's just really important that we understand that. Okay, next slide. The potential for rooftop solar is huge. If you listen to a lot of folks that talk about energy in the newspaper, they always go, we have to pave over the desert because rooftop solar just can't do it by itself, right? It's actually not true. We have built 16 gigawatts, as I mentioned, already to date. That's basically 1 in 10 ratepayers that have solar. And the National Renewable Energy Lab, another branch of the Department of Energy, they did a technical study where they mapped out the state of California, that is in 2016, and they determined that California could have a total of 70 gigawatts on roofs. They only looked at small buildings, they ignored large warehouses, large buildings, and they ignored parking lots. So 70 isn't even accurate. Our technical potential, I put in 30, after consulting a few folks that look at this type of thing, that's way small. We could easily go beyond that. We could build at least 100 gigawatts in a distributed fashion in California, and probably way more than that. Now, this is technical potential. People will point out that doesn't mean every single person with a roof is going to put solar on the roof. But the point is, we have so much more potential in our distributed fashion that doesn't require us to pave over the desert to meet our clean energy goals. Next slide. This is your California solar market, however, on Gavin Newsom's net metering 3.0. So what this slide shows is California's rooftop solar market. These are annual sales going back to just 2020. And we have the colors are just income brackets. So the orange is 50 to 100K family income. So just very middle class, working class families in that orange. And what you see is a healthy growth up until 2022, and then you see in the beginning of 2023 a crazy spike, and that's after the state made a decision to gut the state's net metering program. So a bunch of consumers said, I got to get in before that deadline. There was a big boom, and then there was a crash. That crash sent us down to 0, and then it's rebounded an itty-bitty bit, but our market is still 60% what it was before. It has been set back 10 years. You have to go back to 2015 to find the same sales that we are seeing on a statewide basis in California. This, in contrast to the rhetoric you hear from our politicians, which is the climate crisis is one of our top priorities. We need to do everything we can to solve it. And of course, we need more clean energy. This absolutely flies in the face of that, and it is the wrong thing for California to do. And what's most concerning to us at the statewide association is that the market is flatlining. Most people thought after an M3, there'd be this huge drop, but then the market would start to rebound, and we're not seeing that right now. Next slide. Okay, so how did this happen? How did we have a Democratic governor, a supermajority of Democrats in the legislature, agencies that have been appointed by Democrats for a long time? The Democrats proclaim climate change as a huge priority. How did California, of all states, the Sunshine State, basically not just turn its back on rooftop solar, but come after it? So I think some of you may have seen some of this, but I think some of this is new, and it's really interesting. Okay, next slide. Answer is the utilities got organized in 2013. Okay, next slide. Okay, so again, just to set your brains here, this is California's rooftop solar market on an annual basis, and it's cumulative, right? So this is, if you install some, then the next year you have that, and you've installed a little more. So this is our cumulative growth of rooftop solar. It looks beautiful, right? Even through to right now, you don't see anything of that decline. It looks really healthy, right? But it's cumulative, so it hides the annual. So let's look at the next slide. So this is the annual picture. This is how much we have built every single year of rooftop solar. And so I'm going to walk you through kind of a little bit of the history, because public policy has what's driven this annual growth. So first, I want you to just notice, hold on, that's fine, you can keep that. But before that little blue arrow now is when we passed the Million Solar Roofs Initiative in 2006. And this is when California got really serious about rooftop solar. But you can see before then, there's some little tiny bars. And those were, good early adopters of rooftop solar, many people alarmed by the Enron crisis and scandal and the blackouts, and concerned about climate change too. So we saw a little bit, but the market, once we passed the Million Solar Roofs Initiative, really started to slowly build. And then next couple of years, go twice, we passed a couple of bills to expand net metering. Go ahead, next one. So we're seeing this, lots of progress. California wants to see more rooftop solar. We recognize that it's important to diversify our energy resources. We recognize it's great to do it on the built environment because it brings all of these other win-win solutions. And it's good to arm and put money back in the pockets of everyday families. This is something we all understood. You could walk into any legislative office in Sacramento and people would nod their heads, yes, rooftop solar is a good thing. Next slide, or next, Governor Jerry Brown, huge fan of rooftop solar. He issues an executive order saying we need 12 gigawatts by 2020 of rooftop solar. That would have been a big, huge growth in the market. So we have the governor basically declaring that California is going to really, pedal to the metal on rooftop solar. And these years, this is 2012, next little, So this is like the years of the honeymoon of rooftop solar. That's pretty much everybody thought, rooftop solar is good. It's a good thing for California. So the utilities woke up and they realized, this thing is actually starting to take off. It's middle-class people are doing it. It's not just these early adopters. And the solar industry is starting to lower its prices. They're achieving economies of scale. In no time at all, solar is going to be actually, cost-effective without rebates. What do we do? So they put out a report, and I'm going to go into this report, but in 2013, they release a report, and they get the state legislature in California, because it doesn't take much to own a couple of people in Sacramento and get what you want if you're really powerful, like the utilities. They passed a bill called AB 327, and that bill basically said, there's this problem with rooftop solar. They're not really paying their fair share, and we need to end net metering. So PUC, Public Utilities Commission, that regulates the utilities, we want you to basically end net metering. So, next slide, or next thing. Next year, 2014, a big, huge environmental group, the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, jumps into the fray. They issue another memo called the Utility Death Spiral. And their logic is, we need the utilities to solve our climate crisis, and if they're going to be get killed by all these rooftop solar customers. That's a problem. That's our problem. We now stand with the utilities against rooftop solar. Next. And then NEM 2.0 comes. This is the CPUC's first attempt at lowering or getting rid of net metering. Thanks to Jerry Brown, doesn't quite accomplish it. They were going to. The first proposal that the PUC was scheduled to vote on was horrible. It would have totally gutted our market. We had to light our hair on fire and put pressure on the governor. He literally was on an airplane to the Paris Accord in winter of 2015, December 2015. And we had reporters from ABC News and all these other asking him on the airplane, hey, isn't it a little incongruous? You're flying to Paris to talk about climate change, and your Public Utilities Commission is proposing gutting the incentives for rooftop solar. He stepped in and said, hey guys, calm that down. They issued a revised proposed decision. And it did give us a little haircut, as you can see. The next year we went down about 20%, and our market did stay flat for a couple of years before wildfires started getting people go, maybe I should go rooftop solar. And so our market starts to grow again. Next, yep. But Edison Electric, which is the utilities think tank, they realized NEM 2.0, shoot, it didn't really get rid of rooftop solar the way we wanted to, so we got to rethink and get ourselves organized, and I'm going to go into this memo. Next few years, go 3 at a time, Janet? Yeah, 2, 3. Next 3 years, you don't see a whole lot of activity coming from this attack on rooftop solar. So we've had the NEM 2.0 decision. There's not a whole lot going on, and that's because the utilities are a little distracted with all the wildfires. PG&E starts, right? The Camp Fire, the Kincaid Fire. We also have COVID. That sort of takes everybody's attention. And so it's not until the next year, Janet, yep. Now we see the legislature push a bill, AB 1139, to basically just gut the net metering, get rid of net metering, make clawback, make changes to NEM 1 and NEM 2 customers, and tax solar panels. That actually gets introduced, and it passes the first 2 committees, and we have to light our hair on fire and kill that bill, while at the same time doing battle on NEM 3.0 in the legislature. Next. And then we have NEM 3.0s, the second time that the PUC attempts to kill rooftop solar, and the subsequent change in that is that big, huge drop down. And so next, yep, here's where we are today, and now we have some new messaging I'll get into, which is anybody that uses too little energy, including energy efficiency, is a problem. That's our current messaging. So now this is rooftop solar's bad. These last 10 years, if you walk into the legislature, they kind of go, oh, rooftop solar's bad. You're raising rates on poor people. So I'm going to unpack how that happened. How did California go from rooftop solar's good to rooftop solar's bad in a relatively short period of time? All right, next slide. So going back to that timeline, 2013 is when the utilities started to go, we need a concerted effort to take down rooftop solar because this is going to threaten our profits. So they release a report called Disruptive Challenges in January of 2013. And in this report, they walk through why distributed generation or rooftop solar is so bad for them. And they say the industry, meaning the utility industry, and its stakeholders, which is a key word here, must proactively address these impacts. In other words, we're sounding the alarm, folks. Call to action. We need to take down rooftop solar. So this is 2013. Next slide. Again, from the same report, they just talk about the reason why it's so disruptive is it's disrupting our profits. Right here in black and white. I mean, there's a little bit of like hidden language, but it's pretty clear. Impact on revenues and investor returns. This is the problem. And cross subsidies. So here's this concept of a cost shift. Some people are saving, the other people are losing. There's a shift in cost from solar users to non-solar users. Right there in the very first page of the Disruptor report. And this is what helps fuel that bill in 2013, which, by the way, was pushed with support from a former Edison Electric executive who turned legislator. So they have their friends in the legislature to push things like this. So 2013, okay, next. Next year, as I mentioned, big, prominent national environmental group, very well respected, especially in the California legislature. They jump into the fray, and they have a different spin. They're a stakeholder. They have decided that if we're going to solve climate change, we have to solve it linking arm in arm with the utilities, right? We need to green up the grid, and we can't green up the grid without the utilities, so we're partners. So what's good for the utilities is good for the environment, and what's bad for the utilities is bad for the environment. And they issue a report in 2014 that they dub the utility death spiral, because it's this idea that, wait, if everybody goes solar, there'll be nobody left to like buy PG&E or Edison's electricity, and then the grid will go down, right? And PG&E and Edison will die, and we can't have that. So let's stop rooftop solar and protect the utility. It's basically the message. It's really, really phenomenal, and all said from an environmentalist point of view. So again, it's one thing for Edison Electric and PG&E and the utilities to put forward this message. It's another thing entirely when an environmental group puts it forward. Next slide. So you'll remember after that, in the timeline again, it was 2013 they put out their report. 2014, NRDC jumps into the fray. Legislature passes a bill saying, PUC, you need to get rid of net metering. 2 years later, the PUC attempts to do it, but doesn't totally do the job completely. So it's 2017 now, year after NEM 2.0 was passed. And EEI is back at it. This is the same organization that put forward the disruptor report. And this time, they hire a fancy PR firm because they're like, shoot, we passed this law in 2013. You know, we've already educated everybody about this idea of a cost shift, and we still didn't really deal with the problem. Rooftop solar is still there. Those guys are still there. We only cut the market 20%. That's not good enough. What do we do? So they hire this PR firm that is saying, it must be our language is getting in the way. We're just not talking about the problem the right way. And so they say, oh, I should actually, sorry, I forgot my little red. Really important, in 2016, sorry, I don't know if you're following all my timeline here, but in 2016, when California passed NEM 2.0, that first big attack, the president of the commission, having had his chain yanked by the governor himself, said, okay, you know, we've changed NEM 2.0. It's not as strong as we wanted it to be, but you guys get ready. We're coming back for you. In 2019, we're going to finish the job. It's literally, you could watch the video. In 2019, we're going to come back and we're going to finish the job. So they get back to work, right? That was in 2016 that the commissioner said that. The next year, Edison Electric Institute, which is all of the utilities, Sempra, PG&E, and all these other ones across the country, they hire this firm and they put out this new memo. So this is going to blow your socks off. Next slide. So in this memo that was leaked to us recently, this firm figures out we need to reset the terms of the discussion. We're just not talking about this problem the right way. The public loves renewable energy, and they think utilities are against renewable energy. So utilities, get with the program. You got to be for renewable energy. So you need to be for something, be for utility scale, not rooftop, right? So they start to go utility scale, but nobody really knows what that is. What is it? So they need to reframe utility scale as being something cost-effective and something that has access for all, right? Does that start to sound familiar? Solar for all, right? Utility scale is for everybody, not for those individual people that get it on their roof. And they start to go, and this is so interesting, in 2017 they go, today rooftop solar, it's put up on a pedestal. Everybody loves it. And it's rewarded heavily with subsidies, right? And instead, we need to reframe it as it's only one option, and it's kind of small. Sound familiar? And it really only limits a limited number, benefits a limited number of people. And it causes higher costs for everybody else. So those messages sound pretty darn familiar. In 2017, they were new. Next slide. Again, they have this lovely slide deck where they just say the same thing and over, but it's so interesting to see how the language, they were able to shape the language of the debate because it only takes a few people in policy circles to start to get the memo, right, to get the thing. So they try to reframe utility solar as universal solar and rooftop solar as private solar. Bad, nasty private solar, right? And universal solar, everybody likes that. It increases solar energy for everybody. It's very cost effective. It's the cheapest way to go solar, and it benefits all American homes, businesses, and communities equally. Everybody gets to benefit. Whereas that private solar, it does increase the use of solar, but it provides energy only to individual homes and businesses and benefits only a limited number of people. Next slide. So we support universal solar. It's the most cost-effective way to increase the use of solar energy and bring benefits to all Americans. Next slide. And this is interesting because from my perspective, you know, things like community solar and solar for all and shared solar, these are all terms that have been kind of co-opted and defined at odds with rooftop solar. I often tell policymakers, There's nothing more community than having your public school have solar on its roof or over its parking lot. That's the most community thing you can do. Or how about your local church? If your local church has solar, there's nothing more community than that. And yet somehow a lot of people think today that the community solar program that really hasn't gotten off the ground, but nonetheless is held out as a better option than rooftop solar. It's more community. And this is all coming from this EEI memo from 2017. Next slide. So fast forward, the NEM 3.0 fight gets underway. Because remember, the commission president said, we're coming back for you in 2019. And of course they didn't, because there were all those wildfires plus COVID. So it took them until really late 2020 before they launched the NEM 3.0 proceeding at the Public Utilities Commission. And the utilities formed this front group, and they started plastering the internet and social media with these memes that are like, wait, why are we paying this person to go solar when it's going to cost the rest of us? And rooftop is more expensive than the desert stuff. So let's get rid of that. Next slide. This was a mailer sent out to targeting legislators and their staff in Sacramento and San Francisco. And it shows a wealthy guy. You can't quite see it, but he's in front of a private jet plane with a sweater around his neck, and he's laughing maniacally. And he's the rich white guy who benefits from rooftop solar at the expense of poor people. And I'm going to show you a video, if it plays. This next video was shared to everybody in the state legislature at this same time. Let's just see how they take this EEI messaging, run with it. Pretty amazing, huh? Paid for by PG&E's, oh yeah, stop it. You can go to the next slide there. Paid for by PG&E's labor union. Stakeholders, remember stakeholders. Who has a stake in the utilities being profitable? Let's mobilize them as validators. That video really got under my skin. This was in the heat of Black Lives Matter. People were really having a reckoning. We had this big, giant social conversation, about racism, and here we were thrown right into the mix of that. But not just in a, like academic way, but with just incredible visuals and the suggestion that rooftop solar isn't just bad, but it's racist. It was pretty amazing. But it has a chilling effect. You send that around to a democratically controlled legislature, and that has an absolutely chilling effect. We don't have that kind of money to put those kinds of glossy videos together and then get that message repeated out over and over again. So we're kind of in this tidal wave of negative messaging. Today, so you all know the timeline. We saw this, NEM 3.0 was adopted. They wanted it to be worse. They wanted to tax solar panels. They didn't do that, but they did gut the program, net metering program, and we saw our market collapse and then barely rebound. And now here we are, and it's 2025. NEM 3.0 was decided in 2022, and they're still at it. They're still coming after rooftop solar. The Public Advocate's Office, a branch of the Public Utilities Commission, whose executive director is appointed by the governor, put out a memo in August of last year, just about 6 months ago, declaring net metering 1.0 and 2.0, the 2 million people, including many of you here in the room that have gone solar, you guys are still a problem. You're still causing a cost shift, and we need to go after you. You're saving too much money. And we need you guys to share the burden that everybody else is having to pay of these high energy prices. And so we're still in the same battle. The battle wasn't lost or won with NEM 3.0. They are still coming after us. And this is the cherry on top. Just 2 weeks ago, the CEO of PG&E, a woman named Patty Poppe, issued what she declared, I'm not being sarcastic, she calls it a love letter to her customers. This is the largest utility in America. Issues a love letter. You can hit the down button twice. I just want to point out where love shows up in her little letter. This is an excerpt from her letter. She really is coming from a place of love, the CEO of PG&E. And she's having this open conversation with her customers, and she's addressing some issues, and one is affordability. And she really feels everybody's pain. And she wants to explain, though, but there's good reasons why our energy is so unaffordable. And here's the reason. Californians are not using enough electricity. It's right here. This is literally an excerpt. Because our rates are based on dividing total costs by units of energy, when customers use less, rates go up. And that's actually really bad for those most financially viable, or most financially vulnerable. Isn't that incredible? With love, that's literally how she signed the letter, Patty Poppy. So to me, we have now come to a whole new level of inversing everything in California that we have known. For 50 years, California has said the best electron is the electron not used. That is the highest priority for us as energy planners, is we should incentivize efficiency. We should build our economy the most efficient way possible. That is a no-brainer, and that has been absolute energy gospel in California for 50 years. And as a result, we have done a really good job. We've grown our economy and kept energy use per capita stable for decades. But we are taking that and we're going this whole new level of, in fact, energy efficiency and rooftop solar. Anybody that uses less electricity is actually now the problem. I know, phenomenal. So, next slide. So now the great cost shift myth has officially taken hold. I was talking to a really high up person in Sacramento in the energy space, and when I did this same presentation to him, because we've been doing this education tour for a couple months now of deprogramming people's understanding and minds on this, he said, but this is like gospel. This idea that rooftop solar is bad, it has become gospel. Like, you really have your work cut out because everybody believes it is so true, they're not even questioning it. It's a matter of faith. But let me try to unpack it with you. This is, again, I'm arming the angels, because you guys are all going to have, you never bought the cost shift yourselves. But I think it's important for us all to understand what is the cost shift and how it is so wrong. So, you hanging in here with me? Okay. Feel free to ask questions as we go, by the way, and hopefully there'll be lots of time for questions. But there's no dumb question on energy, because it's such a complicated issue. Apologies for the small font and the many, many words, but let me just try to unpack the concept of the cost shift. Patty kind of does it with her little love letter, but let me just unpack it a little bit more. The myth is based on, first of all, the utility costs, every dollar they spend and that they invest in the electric grid, those are all fixed. They're sunk, they're set in stone, and every single dollar is well spent. It's all stuff that is needed to keep the lights on. Electricity is an essential resource, right? Everybody needs it. And so every dollar that PG&E and Edison spend are an absolute fixed thing. And every dollar is needed. It's like they're like the firehouse, right? We all need public schools, we all need firehouses, we all need Edison Electric. So that's the first thing. Nobody questions that. And everything they do is for the good of all, right? That's the second part of that whole myth. But the problem is, as more people go solar, then all of those fixed costs that are set in stone, that are sunk, are now divided by a smaller number of people, right? So if you have these fixed costs, let's just say the top of the fraction, right? A rate is cost divided by sales or usage. If we have this and it is set in stone, and then all of these selfish people go solar, now the usage is like this. And that makes whoever's left holding the bag pay more, which, by the way, are all poor people, right? So that's the concept of the cost shift. Obviously, it's really important that everybody knows that the utilities happen to earn a profit off of every ratepayer dollar they spend on the grid. So the more they spend on this public resource, this essential service, the more they profit. And but the more distant the power plant, therefore, the more poles and wires are needed to be built, and then the higher the profit. So forget about the fact that we could actually generate the same electron, that essential resource, in a different way, because now we need it to be as far away from our cities as possible. And so their recipe for success, this is what the EEI and their PR firms have figured out, is you establish this myth that rooftop solar is causing rates to rise. You increase your spending over this period of time so that rates go up. And you create kind of a crisis, like a fever pitch where nobody's thinking straight. And then you basically improve your profits, and at the same time, because you're blaming rooftop solar, you're now going to take down the competition. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant strategy. Go ahead.
I've got a question. Do you know what the ratio of the money they spent to create this?
Oh, you mean how much did they spend on EEI and...
No electricity involved, just spending money to change everybody's mind.
I don't know. I could dig that up. I mean, I know they have to report money spent on lobbying and influencing the Public Utilities Commission. They have to report that. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. But how much has it been going back to 2013? It would be in the billions. It would be in the billions. Yeah, and that's all paid for by ratepayers, by the way. There was a bill introduced in the legislature last year to basically say, you guys can't do that. If you guys want to spend your money, free speech, go ahead, spend your money spinning whatever little tail you want to spin, but don't use ratepayer dollars to do it. And that got crushed in the legislature in the first committee. Next slide. So this is again, we're going back to square one. We're unpacking the cost shift myth, right? Number one is a lot of people don't understand how net metering works, and I apologize if I've used the term and didn't even stop to define it. Kind of assume a lot of you guys know this stuff. But here's how it works in a nutshell. Most of California, the houses are this close together, right? And that house in the middle has solar panels, as you can see. For the most part, on average, all homes with solar use half the amount of electrons generated by their solar panels in the middle of the day in that exact moment. They use it on site the moment that electron is generated. The other 50% of the electrons generated are immediately shared with their next door neighbors. Electricity, as you probably know, is like water. It just needs a place to go. So if it doesn't go into that middle home, into the refrigerator or the air conditioning or whatever, it goes immediately out, and it never even leaves the neighborhood. Each little transformer in California's grid at the distribution level services about 6 homes. So it never leaves those little wires that really were built a long time ago, not a major part of our expenses. So the electricity that middle home is generating themselves with their own money, no ratepayer dollar went to buy that panel. It's going and sharing half of it with its neighbors at no expense to Edison or PG&E, just flowing on those little wires next door. And then next arrow. Some of you, I was talking to some of you guys before the presentation here, some people that go solar have such a big system, they pretty much cover all of their electricity usage in a year, and they don't have much of a bill. Most net metered customers in California, most of the 2 million people with rooftop solar pay a pretty sizable bill, even after they go solar, and they're paying 80 to 160 a month bills. This is from a data request we made of each of the 3 utilities, so it is just based on data. Most people pay a very sizable bill. Remember that number, because we're going to come back to it. But the point is, people are paying the utility, they're writing big checks, even after they go solar. Next slide. Okay, this is one of my favorite. It's a lot of stuff on a chart, but let me just try to explain it. Some of you that are energy geeks maybe are familiar with this graphic. It's put out by the CalISO, or it's something similar to this. It's put out by the grid operator. It's a snapshot of a day, a 24-hour period. So the numbers at the bottom are the hours in the day. And it's basically California's electricity demand on the grid, or total electricity demand, in a given day, on a hot day in August. We grabbed this chart from CalISO's website. And all of the data that's in a solid color below that magenta pink line comes straight from the CalISO. That's all grid-supplied electricity and grid demand. That's the demand on the grid, how Californians used electricity on this hot day in August. What we did to modify this graph is we added that little lump at the top that you can kind of see has vertical lines. That's rooftop solar. Because it's behind the meter, the grid operator, the CalISO, doesn't see it, and they don't bother to add it back into any of their charts. So when you go to CalISO and you hear about the duck curve, probably some of you have heard about this, of supply and demand of electricity and how renewable energy has this problem because it's intermittent, right? They ignore rooftop solar in all of those charts that they put out. So we took the time to put it in. And the reason why it's so important to do that is when you put rooftop solar into the chart, you can see that California's electricity demand peaks at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It doesn't peak at 6 o'clock in the evening. That's what most of us have been told these past couple of years. And then a lot of us go, right, that's when I go home, and maybe I have an induction stove and I, turn that on, and maybe I put the air conditioning on even though it's bad to do because my house is hot, whatever. Most of us think peak electricity is at 6 because the utilities have done such a bang-up job of basically trying to ignore the contributions of solar energy. Oh boy, I'm already at 45 minutes. Okay, I gotta go faster. Yeah. Okay, so rooftop solar is playing a critical role right now. This is 2024. It is playing a critical role, and it is lowering demand on the grid. It is taking weight off the grid. And those of you who remember the blackouts, it's a problem when we have too much demand on the grid in a hot summer day. It is a problem. It costs us a lot of money to meet that demand. So if we take weight off the grid on a hot day, that is very, very good. The utilities want to ignore all that. They want to literally hide it. And they want to only focus on the net demand, which is that third arrow, which is that 6 o'clock. And that's just the difference between demand and utility scale renewables. And that's what they focus on. And it's true. We would like to get all that gray out of the grid. All that gray is fossil and nuclear. We'd like to get it all out, so it's all that pretty colors instead. And we need to do that clearly with more solar and more batteries so that that sun shining in the day can green up the grid all hours of the day. But getting rid of solar or slowing down solar is the opposite thing we need to do. Next slide. Next slide. Is it not going? Okay. This is this phenomenal chart, this economist named Richard McCann that we only recently became aware of. He did this for a different client, actually farmers who are part of the rooftop solar movement. He showed, basically, this is now going back in time, if you go back all the way to 2004, and you map in that cumulative solar, rooftop solar installed in California, you'll see those bars at the bottom. That's that cumulative chart I showed you earlier. Up top is California's peak electricity demand, that blue line. And that's how much electricity California uses on the highest demand day of the year. And the reason why the state of California tracks that is because you have to build the grid to service the peak, right? So that's what drives all grid investments is the peak, not winter, because you oversize the grid for the peak. The red dotted line, interestingly, is the forecast of what peak load would do in California over those 20 years. So the California Energy Commission estimated back in 2005 that our peak load would grow by 15,000 megawatts by 2023. Instead, as you can see, it pretty much remained flat. There's some hot years, the crazy heat dome from a couple years ago, but you don't build actually to this crazy peak. You build to the average peak. So we have kept the average peak flat, and we have done it, next arrow, with the help of rooftop solar. The correlation is almost 1-to-1. And it's important to know that that red dotted line includes energy efficiency. So the commission already estimates what are we going to do to keep growing energy efficiency, doing things more efficiently, but with a growing economy, with a growing population, the growing use of electronic gadgets in our home and businesses, and with growing temperatures, we are going to see our electricity usage grow. But rooftop solar met that growth. It covered load growth. And this is important because remember back to Patty Poppy? She claims that the energy usage has gone down. She's not right. That's totally false. Energy usage has stayed flat because rooftop solar covered load growth. So the whole idea of departing load, remember that pie, is that that pie has a set fixed costs and there are fewer people to pay for it. We're going to look at this in a second, but it's worth repeating. The pie is growing under Patty Poppy. You know, this is PG&E wants the pie to grow because they profit off of that bigger pie, right? So the pie is actually growing, but rooftop solar is actually putting a downward pressure on those costs, keeping it from having to grow. Next slide. And as we look ahead with electrification, the sort of absolute absurdity of the cost shift is we're going to use way more electricity in the next 10 years, right? More people are buying electric cars, people are installing heat pumps. We are about to grow our electricity usage significantly. That's the blue bar on the left. We model out if we could get our rooftop solar market back off, out of the doldrums and back to growing, we could meet a huge portion of that load growth. We wouldn't have to build more utility scale power plants to meet that load growth if we did it in a distributed fashion instead. That's going to save a lot of money, just logically speaking, right? But not according to the cost shift myth. Okay, next slide. So we already covered this. What is a rate? A lot of people don't understand it. It's just cost plus profits divided by sales. That makes a fraction. That fraction is a rate, okay? That's what a rate is. Next slide. This is hard for you to see. Sorry for the small font. But this is the components of a rate broken down. This is basically what we spend our money on here in California for every kilowatt hour we buy. Almost 60% of our money for every kilowatt hour we buy goes to transmission and distribution, poles and wires. It goes to delivering the electron into the customer. Almost 60%, okay? Huge, huge cost. Only 30%, most people think this is the largest portion, is the cost to generate the electrons. And by the way, people don't understand this, but net metering is not a cost to anybody. It's a transaction, it's a credit. It does not show up in a rate. There's nowhere in this rate where rooftop solar shows up, okay? It's just reduced demand. And then the top two bars are just programs like low-income assistance, amounts to about 10%, and rooftop solar users most pay into those programs. Okay, next slide. So this is a phenomenal. So now remember going back to the flat demand, California's peak demand has been flat for 20 years, and yet look at the utilities spending. This is spending on transmission and distribution. Those are the three colored lines going back to 2002. Look at how much they have increased. This is the rate. This is how much they are spending on delivering electricity to consumers. Why is it going up so much if demand is flat? And by the way, it's flat year-round too. It's not like we're using more in the spring. We've kept electricity demand flat for 20 years and peak, and the utilities are spending like crazy. Why is that? That should be the number one question. Next slide. And this one just shows how this gets a little complicated. It's kind of from an economist who really gets into this stuff. But what he's showing here is that the cost shift is not happening. And the reason why this graph shows that is because the green solid line is spending. The dotted line is rates. Spending is going up at the exact same ratio as rates. And the reason why that, in and of itself, debunks the cost shift is because if what we had was fixed costs, remember the fixed cost myth? If costs were fixed and we were having fewer and fewer people buying PG&E or Edison's product, those fixed costs would be then divided up among fewer and fewer electrons or rates, right? Sales. But what we're seeing, and so you would see if the cost shift was real, what you would see is spending would be flat because it's fixed over time. The spending line would be maybe only rise with the inflation, that dotted line, that little dotted line is inflation, and rates would be spiking. Do you get that? It's just a ratio. So this would show the departing load and the cost shift by virtue of the two lines would start to depart. We don't see this. We see it, there's a little bit of back and forth, but for the most part, it's almost 1-to-1 ratio. And you see the same, this is SCE, same thing with PG&E, same thing with Sempra. Next slide. And here's where everybody goes, oh, but the spending is going up because of wildfires. Those wildfires are why the bills are going up. And the reason why that's such a powerful message is because most people go, you know, PG&E maybe probably should have, you know, kept their line better maintained. Edison maybe should have depowered that line if proven guilty of the fire down in LA right now, one of them. But they're kind of victims of climate change, just like the rest of us. I mean, the state wouldn't have gone up, you know, in flames like that if we weren't in a drought, right? So this is like, it's kind of a public expense. We should all pay to help mitigate climate change and make our grid safer. We should all have to pay for these wildfire mitigation costs. And nobody should get out of that, especially not those solar users, those individual private solar people. But what the data shows, if you dive into each of the rate cases over the past several years, is what our economist did, and he pulled out what is PG&E, Edison, and Sempra spending on wildfire mitigation. He found that only 12% of the spending is due to wildfires. So you can't, 12% is no small number, right? These are billions of dollars being spent, but it still doesn't explain that meteoric increase of spending. What is it? What are they spending all of that money on, which is leading to increased rates? It's not wildfires. Next slide. This is really what's driving it. This is profits. So you can see where PG&E's profits went way down. I think that's probably in store for Edison here. But boy, they sure did recover pretty nicely, didn't they? Look at PG&E. If you just look at the start of this, they had $1.16 in profits in 2005, and then now they're at almost $3 in profits. It's a threefold increase almost in profitability over this period of time in the face of flat electricity demand and now an affordability crisis. They seem to be doing just fine, increasing their profits. Next slide. So this is going back to that. In August, the Public Advocate's Office published a new cost shift analysis that says rooftop solar users, all 2 million of them, are causing an $8.5 billion cost shift. It's no small chunk of change, my friends. This is a huge problem, $8.5 billion that poor people without solar are having to now burden and having to pay. $8.5 billion. They published this in a fact sheet in August, and what that actually afforded us to do, because it's been a bunch of just weird white noise kind of creating this myth for a couple of years, is it allowed us to say, can you please show us your math? We submitted a request directly to the Public Advocate's Office and said, show us your spreadsheet, and we hired this economist to break it down. And what he did is he looked at all of their assumptions, and he corrected them. And when you correct for the wrong assumptions, you actually get to almost a $1.2 billion cost savings. And what's amazing about this, I'm going to do this fast. We can do this longer later, or I can go back to it if you have the energy. But these 5 corrections you see in this sort of waterfall, they're really obvious. This is not like, oh, fancy footwork, the solar industry hired an economist, and of course the economist came back with. This is like, open to the world, you can scrutinize it all you want, and in fact, when we've brought this to the Public Advocate's Office, they really have nothing to say. They honestly have nothing to say. The best thing they have to say is, well, you know, people using less electricity is bad. Seriously. The biggest correction is that the Public Advocate's Office considers self-generation a cost shift. It's a cost to the utility if you don't buy their product. When we plug in energy efficiency into the PAO's model, it spits out a $17 billion cost shift, by the way. So we should probably go out and replace all of those double-paned windows with single-pane windows, because that's how we're going to lower rates, right? So you get the biggest reduction. The next one is just data that they used wrong. So they used the wrong retail rate. So what is that credit? Those NEM customers getting for the energy they send back on the grid. They inflate that number. They use the wrong number. This should be bedrock. Like, a rate is a published public document. It is not a mystery. They just ignored that people are on time of use rates, if you're familiar with that. Solar customers, most of us, get a credit that's lower than the purchase price in the evening. So we've inversed the pricing in solar. So they just didn't do that. They also used a higher capacity factor. If you're a little bit of an energy geek, you know the difference, but that shaves off $1 billion alone. If you assume the solar panels on roofs around the state are generating more electricity, you're going to have a higher cost shift number. So it's just these little things that our state agency, the Public Advocate's Office, should absolutely know and not make this kind of mistake. And we were shocked. They ignore that 15% of all solar customers are on CARE. CARE is a public assistance program. They automatically get a lower credit because they're on an assisted lowered rate. They just ignored that. And across 15% of 2 million, that adds up to a lot in this cost shift method. And then they ignore historic savings, so they only use this avoided cost calculator, which I'll talk about if we have time, but it minimizes the value of rooftop solar, like what does it displace, all that transmission and distribution, what does that add up to in terms of savings? They cherry pick and they deliberately choose a really low number, and then they apply it backwards, as if the cost savings in 2025 are the same as the cost savings in 2010. That's totally wrong. Utility-scale renewable energy projects were actually really expensive in the early years, and we displaced those. We displaced more expensive utility-scale energy and expensive transmission and distribution. They ignored that. And then last but not least, they ignore the bills people actually pay. Remember I said that most net metering customers pay $80 to $160 a month? They ignored those payments. They didn't factor them in. So when you do just those 5 things, you actually get a cost saving. But they obviously can't show that because that undercuts the cost shift myth and would actually maybe spur the state into action of supporting rooftop solar and batteries again, and they don't want that. Next slide. I don't know that we have time. I'll come back to it if you guys want to, but I know there are other speakers, so we'll come back. But this is that really fraudulent avoided cost calculator, and they ignore all the benefits that rooftop solar provides for all ratepayers. When you put solar on your roof, you are generating an amount of electricity, a huge amount over 20 years that the utility doesn't have to then service. That provides 20 years worth of savings that all ratepayers benefit from. Even the utility's own go-to consulting firm admits that's what each of those blue bars are savings. But then they only pick those small numbers in those small years, the early years, as their savings number. So that's how they get that really, really small benefits on the cost-benefit equation. They cherry pick the numbers in that red box instead of averaging all of the savings over 20 years. It's totally fraudulent. Next slide, or are you going to go through? Yeah, next slide. Okay, so in summary, rooftop solar is really good. It's brought a lot of benefits to California. It's brought a lot of benefits to all Californians. It has helped reduce pressure of industrializing the desert and other open space, beautiful open spaces. Electricity rates have gone up because utility spending has gone up. Why are they spending money? This is what our regulators should be in crisis mode trying to figure out. We should be auditing. Did you know nobody audits on an annual basis? PG&E and Edison aren't audited. They say we need billions of dollars to do X, Y, and Z, and nobody checks their books afterward. There's nobody. That's not what the regulators are doing. A lot of their T&D expenses are self-approved. It's really a crisis of improper regulation. And so utility spending has been the problem, not driven by wildfires, not driven by an increase of usage, driven by their profit motive. And as we electrify, this problem's only going to get worse. Regulators need to do their job. And we need more rooftop solar in storage, not less. Next slide. So this is just where we go from here. But the sad part is the first 3 bullets on the California Solar and Storage, where do we go from here, are just stop attacking. That's how bad California is right now. You have to get down to the fourth bullet before we start talking about a proactive measure. Because if we can't stop the attack, we can't actually work forward on improving the market conditions. And then, like I said earlier, we've got states all around the country that are cut and pasting the cost shift argument. States that have barely any rooftop solar. Wyoming is doing a whole thing about the cost shift. There's probably 10 people in Wyoming with rooftop solar. I mean, it's absolutely insane, but we have become the negative leader. Next slide. If we work together, obviously I'm still bullish on this, the potential for all of us to work together through collective activism and through collective action, like buying the right thing with our pocketbooks. We can actually solve things and solve big problems, but we got to work together. So thank you so much for having me. Sorry I went over long. I don't know, Stephen, I told you needed a cane. But if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them, or you could just cane me off the stage right now.
We do have a few questions here, and I encourage people to come up and present a few. I think the first question I have is, first of all, it's so compelling and gets one riled up. What does one do? So, for instance, there is a Newsom recently put out an executive order that essentially says, as your governor, I'm saying that rooftop solar is the cause of all this problem. It's a whole executive order. There is a way one should get in touch with one's legislator and talk about this. There is a handout up on this table off to the left that has a sort of a corrected version of this executive order, which is this was put together with Solar Rights Alliance, which really gives a good sense of why it's bogus. So I'd like to hear any thoughts you might have on that.
So you guys should all join the Solar Rights Alliance. They're a great grassroots organization. We work really closely with them. We like to joke they're like the NRA of the sun. So they're there to defend the right that we all have to capture the sun that falls on our roof and use it and not be penalized for it, and something that we should be incentivizing. We all collectively should be reaching out to our state legislators. I don't know that there's going to be a whole lot we can do with the governor right now. But our legislators have not totally drinking the Kool-Aid. They're kind of contaminated with this cost shift myth, but with enough outreach from their constituents and with getting this kind of briefing, they can turn around, and they actually want to turn around. It is in their best interest as an elected official to do what their constituents want. We, as voters, as constituents, all want to be able to generate energy from the sun and not be under the thumb of our electric utility. There's nobody that's just a regular person that believes this stuff. So if we can collectively reach out, and even if all you do is, hey, this rooftop solar thing, it's a total myth, get the briefing, get informed. Like right now, that's going to help us, because this is what I spend most of my days right now, is in the Capitol doing this briefing for legislators. And it's working, but we need to get more paying attention.
If you have some questions,
sorry,
please
Steve.
go to the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on up here to.
You got to use the microphone because this is being broadcast, right? So.
Yes.
So what you've described is, with rooftop solar, the production is closer to the point of demand. If you have rooftop solar, for example, on a large warehouse down near Indio or Palm Springs or whichever community it was, or if you have rooftop solar in a residential community, the production is right where people are using it.
Yeah.
And so that reduces the necessity for for a large network. And you pointed out that the network cost of distribution is about twice the cost of production. So the way they're describing this really inverts reality. Mm-hmm. This really expensive network that's sucking up 2/3 of the cost of everybody's utility bill is coming because there aren't rooftop solar.
That's right.
Because the demand isn't close to, or because the production isn't close to demand. So I think you can probably
Elaborate on that?
You could flip that argument on them.
Yeah, you're so right. And if you go back to that one chart, if you can visualize it, the one with the CalISO chart with all the colors of how we generate and meet peak demand in California, first of all, solar peaks, it follows load. You would not see it peak if people weren't using the electron at that point in time. So solar is called a coincident with demand. Solar generates the most electrons when California needs it the most. And guess what happens when there's cloud cover? There's less demand. So it's a perfect relationship. Solar is perfect, especially for California. And if you remember how in the middle of the day, even there in 2024, there was tons of gray and brown in the middle of the day? It's not like we've built, you would think from the rhetoric that we have built so much rooftop solar and utility scale solar that we have zero fossil fuels on the grid in the middle of the day. It's not true at all. We are burning tons of fossil fuels as the sun is shining brightest, and we're all suffering from increased temperatures. So we need way more rooftop solar, and it works exactly when California needs it, which is the exact point. And as we grow our demand, we need to cover that load and then some, right? We need to meet increased demand and still green up the grid and decarbonize the grid. So we got to run twice as fast. So we still have work to make up. We haven't greened up the grid. So every electron increased demand needs to be covered times 2 with a solar electron, right? We need a solar electron to meet demand, and then we need another one to match it to cover existing demand so we can green up the grid. And then we need batteries to make that sun shine at night. And that's how we decarbonize the entire grid. So yeah, it's a really important point. And again, a lot of people go, well, but if I have solar and I'm grid connected and I don't have a battery, I'm using the grid at nighttime. So maybe I'm not paying my fair share. But this is 2 points here. The utilities are not building the grid infrastructure for nighttime usage. Nighttime usage goes way down. So the grid is like a straw, and you have a straw or pipe. You build the pipe for peak. That's where all the money goes into building that bigger pipe. That surplus capacity at night doesn't add costs. It's just using existing infrastructure. So the fact that you're using electricity at night and not at the peak is where the benefit comes from. That's a good thing. This is what we want. We want people to use less in the middle of the day and more at night. And then remember, most NEM customers are paying $80 to $160 a month for that nighttime and winter usage. They're more than paying for their fair share of the grid.
Just quickly, I'm kind of still stuck on monopoly. I think of utilities, there's a tendency to think of utilities as in the service of the public.
Yeah.
And there's a sense that these profits are somehow flowing back to us. Since the Reagan administration, how have utilities changed, and how should we be thinking of them? Because if this money was going to an oil company specifically, people would be up in arms. So
Yeah.
can you just run through that history quickly and
Yeah.
give us a new way of explaining them?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think part of the reason why their cost shift myth is so effective is because they have the word, or at least the Public Utilities Commission, people think of the utilities as a public entity, and that those profits are just pretty minor, and it's just to keep the thing afloat, right? It's just they need a little bit of profit just to keep afloat so they can provide this public service. And so as a result of that, and that gets back to that first bullet of like the myth, is that every dollar they spend is absolutely necessary and absolutely in the public's interest. So we need to cover that. And to NRDC's argument, we can't let them get harmed because they're providing this public service. So they need to be profitable. And California, about 30, 40 years ago, during the Reagan years, decided, and this was pushed by NRDC, to decouple how the utilities profit. The idea was innocent enough. It was, let's not let them profit off of every electron sold, which is how they used to profit. If they sold more electrons, they made more profit. Let's let them profit off of building infrastructure to meet demand. So now, and to this day, utilities don't necessarily profit directly off of the electrons sold, but they profit off of the need to build poles and wires. So therein lies the conflict with distributed generation that is like none other, because we actually directly conflict with their profits. Because with more rooftop solar, they need to build less and less infrastructure. That's good for all of us, right? It's a shared grid. We are sharing electrons in the most community-centered way possible, but it's not good for PG&E and Edison. And that is a conflict. We would like policymakers to get at that. We think we need to bring the utility profit model into the 21st century, and they also just need to be told no. They don't need to be some of the most profitable corporations in this state, and they are. They are, you know, I always joke about the Monopoly game. You remember the Monopoly game? You basically won if you controlled the green and the blue properties, right? And you built hotels on them. Those were the big money makers. That was capitalism at its best, if you played that game. The utilities, they're kind of boring. They weren't major money makers, but they were solid. It was a very solid investment. This is how our utilities should be if we really, truly treated them like a public entity with a little bit of private dollars in it, but we don't. We kind of are allowing them to be Park Place and Broadway on a monopoly board right now.
Hi, I'm Stacy Doolittle, and I'm on the board of MBCA. And what you just said kind of went with my question. You know, I'm pro-solar, but I'm also a capitalist, and I've worked at Fortune 50 companies. And from this work, I understand that businesses, which what these utilities are all about making money. That's how capitalism works, as I understand it. How do you think a business, a utility such as Edison, is supposed to react to their facing their own death spiral, revenue loss to solar, instead of how they responded? I mean, what should they be doing if they're all about making money?
Totally. It's a great question. They're being very rational. Utilities are acting absolutely rationally. They want as big, and they actually have an obligation, a legal obligation to their shareholders to return as big a profit every single year as possible. That is how we have set things up. So they're being very, very rational. But here's my answer. Our regulators, so two things. One is they were given a monopoly, but it is dependent on a contract that suggests that they are going to be regulated. And what we have right now is essentially an unregulated market. What the Public Utilities Commission is not doing is essentially letting our utilities get away with murder. And the regulators need to be strong. They need the politicians, including the governor, to say, you need to rein these guys in. They should only spend a penny of ratepayer money if it's absolutely necessary. We should stretch every dollar that comes from all of us as ratepayers as far as possible. We should do more with less. This should be the economic principle, and that might make them less profitable, but it's not necessarily a death spiral, especially in the face of electrification. It's so ridiculous that they're running around with this death spiral idea when we're using more electricity. So it just doesn't make sense. They really don't. When you are given a monopoly, you are not given a profit guarantee. You are not given a guarantee. And if your product is no longer needed, it is not serving the purpose, you are not protected by the government. That's not how monopolies work. But they have kind of confused people on that front.
And please come up here to ask your question, as we are shooting this on Zoom, and we want to make sure the people that are on Zoom see the people that are asking the questions. Who's next? You won't come up here? Tell everybody who you are. We love this woman.
Oh. Hi, I'm Claudia Saul, and I have two questions for you. We have a law that new housing has to have some solar on it. Now, is the utilities going to be coming after that? That is to encourage people to do solar. And the other question I had was, one of the charts looked like that they were still importing power to manage their grid. Did I see that wrong? That there was we were showing where the power was coming from, and one of them looked like it was imported power.
Yeah.
Is that true? And so that if we had had more solar, we wouldn't have to import that power?
That's right.
Because I know we pay considerably more for that, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So absolutely, California imports a significant amount of electricity. A lot of that is dirty, or some of it is hydro that could be used by other states to decarbonize their grid. So we do import. We have really no excuse for importing from other places. We have so much sunshine, so much potential to generate our own and meet our own needs. But if we used more solar and built more solar, we could squeeze out the dirty stuff from the grid, and some of that is imports. And what was the first part of the question?
Well, the one about the having solar on new housing, it's required.
Oh, yeah. Yes. The California Energy Commission, part of the Million Solar Roofs bill passed in 2006 was this idea of let's build with solar. So we have our existing housing stock and warehouses and businesses, but that we need to green up. But at least going forward, let's get solar into the building code, just like efficiency, like insulation and double-paned windows. So we slowly, took us a while, but we finally put that in place. Now every new construction, whether it's a warehouse, a grocery store, or an apartment building, or a single-family homes, has to have solar, and soon all have to have batteries. So this is tremendous, this is really great, this is what California is known for, but this right now is under threat. They're coming after energy efficiency as well as rooftop solar, and this, yes, this code is going to be under threat. And they have not been huge allies of it, it's happened despite them. But keep in mind, as great as this code, building efficiency code is, we're not building enough, and it's increased load. It's to cover increased load. So we have to get where we need to go, we've got to retrofit our existing buildings. We have to cover the existing rooftop 5 times faster than we're building new rooftops if we're going to squish the carbon out of our grid, right? So the retrofit market is actually the most important. It's about 10 times bigger than the new market. So some people kind of go to me, why are you complaining about this net metering policy change? Who cares? You've got your mandate. Like all your businesses that are belly aching, they can just go meet the new bill. But the housing market is just not very big, which is another topic of conversation for California, but as it relates to energy, it's important.
You might want to ask our audience how many people have solar on here, just for your encouragement too.
That'd be good, yeah. Show of hands if you have solar, or on your a business, or in addition. Great. Thank you. You're part of the solution, by the way.
Hi. My question, for about 10 years, we've been talking about getting solar on our house, and that's why we came today to learn more about solar. But after hearing all this controversy that I wasn't even aware of the extent of it,
Yeah.
I'm kind of rethinking that. Do we wait until things settle down? Did we miss our opportunity? Like we should have done it 2 or 3 years ago? So what should someone thinking of solar do?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a double-edged sword going around and talking about this because of that very dynamic. Some of my members kind of get upset with me, and I understand. I wouldn't be doing this if we actually weren't in a crisis, and I think we need to, the truth and transparency and daylighting all of this is way more important, but it is a double-edged sword. So to answer your question, I am confident we're going to correct this ship, that with this data, with this information and working together, we're going to get California back on track. It may take us, a little bit, but we're going to get back on track. In the meantime, we've got to hold the line. And we've already, got screwed over with the net metering decision. But it is still, you can still save money by going solar today, even under the NEM 3 tariff. And especially if you add a battery to your system. It is still cost-effective for you to go solar. The downside of the NEM decision was that it made it just take longer for you to recoup your investment, and it take a few years longer. If you're going to be in your home for a while, it is absolutely the right thing to do because it protects you from rising rates, and the rates are about to go through the roof, especially for Edison. So I would actually argue now is actually a really good time. And I know that seems like I may be talking out of both sides of my mouth, but the fact is they did great harm to our market. It has done great harm to the industry, but they kind of can't keep a good idea down. it is still a really good idea to capture the sunlight that falls on your roof, put it into a battery especially, and protect yourself from rising rates and be part of the solution. So you should do it. Nobody is protected right now from the attacks. So as I mentioned, NEM 1 and NEM 2 customers are right now in the bullseye. So they're not going to do, they can't really do much more harm to NEM 3 other than this solar tax idea, which we need to work together to block. We're brainstorming and daydreaming about a ballot measure that just says you can't tax solar. I don't care what your excuse is. You just can't tax the sun. That would protect all of us in perpetuity. Until then, we're all in this together. Whether you have solar right now or not, whether you got in before the deadline or not, is irrelevant. They're coming after us, and we need to work together to fight them. So I don't think that's a reason to wait. Hopefully it's helpful. And I have tips for how to go solar if you want to hear.
And one thing that I want to add as one of those tiresome evangelists for solar who've done it DIY and also through normal channels is, while they've lost some of this, savings from the subsidies, the cost of batteries and the cost of inverters and the cost of panels has gone down so much in the past few years that while you say, I don't get these subsidies, it's true, but when you're looking at batteries, they're going to be a third of what they were 5 years ago. So what you're doing is buying something that's actually cheaper now. And while the lobbies have taken away, not your lobby.
No, yeah.
Yeah, but while the utilities have taken away some of the savings, you're buying, a car that's $3,000 instead of $15,000. And that's, to me, that's the appeal. Is you get in now, it's much, much better than 5 years ago.
This is the last question, and this comes from a viewer, a participant on Zoom.
Okay.
And they would like to know if your group is coordinating efforts with others in Oregon and Washington.
Yes, we are. There is a network of organizations that are dedicated to protecting rooftop solar all around the country, and we are absolutely working with our allies in Oregon and Washington, two states that are facing net metering attacks under the same cost shift myth. We're also working with Minnesota, North Carolina, all across the country. And we are sharing notes. Puerto Rico, of all places, is seeing an attack on net metering, and we are working. In fact, the economists we've hired is actually helping file comments in Arizona and Washington State right now. So all of this is getting out. Good question. Okay, I'm happy to answer other questions, but there's another speaker here.
Thank you so much, Bernadette. I'd like to now ask Alan Songer, MBCA board member, to come up here and talk briefly with the public safety power shutoffs that we've all experienced in the last few weeks. Alan has a couple of options shy of putting on a full solar system to present. Alan?
First, I wanted to talk about poles and wires, just briefly before I go into this, because those of us who live in this area have noticed that every pole and wire has been replaced in our neighborhoods in the last 2 years. It's an ongoing effort with taller poles, Kevlar-wrapped poles, insulated wires, and I would drive around and think this is such a great thing, because it's going to help us during potential wildfires and windstorms. We won't have our power cut off, and I was sort of impressed by all of it as a great infrastructure project. And today I learned that it's just being paid by everybody's Edison bill, and I didn't really understand that till now. So thank you very much. Anyway, even with all that infrastructure, we've noticed that we've had a lot of power outages in the last 6 months. We had one 2 weeks ago that was 13 hours. Power went off at 9 a.m., came on at about 10:30. And out where we live, we don't have cell phone service. We have a great solar system, but we don't have battery backup. So when that power goes off, our well turns off, our telephone access turns off, our internet turns off, and we're stuck at the end of a 2-mile dirt road with sort of cut off from society, and it's somewhat unnerving. I mean, I remember I was waiting for an email that day, and I drove over to the Red Dog Saloon and got on their Wi-Fi just to get an important email, and I'm sitting there and I ended up drinking a couple of beers, which I shouldn't have done. And anyway, so again, also installing rooftop solar is not as attractive as it once was. I know it's still worth doing, and it's a huge investment that many of us can't really afford. So what do we do if we don't have battery backup and the power goes out for 2, 3, 5, 15 hours, whatever it is, and we're sort of untethered from the world at large? So I went deep into the bowels of Reddit, which I loathe to do, and went on a bunch of forums where people were talking about backup systems in this, if this comes about, what do they do? And there are myriads of companies that put out solar generators and batteries that you can charge up and get anywhere between 300 and 3,000 watts in 2 to 3, 4 hours time with solar panel, bring it into your home, and the little ones are only $200, $300, $400, and it would power your Wi-Fi, keep your tablet charged, keep your laptop charged for 24 hours, which is great. I mean, because your refrigerator's going to stay okay for a day without power. You know, if the well goes out, now I'm dragging my propane generator down to the well and plugging it in and turning it on to have water as needed. But one of these big systems, you could even lug out to your well, turn it on, fill up a few water bottles, turn it off, bring it back into the house, plug in your refrigerator. I know it's a pain in the neck, but it's better than a propane generator because it's a lot smaller, it's a lot more efficient, and the power that you generate to power these things is basically free. They come with solar panels. You just stick it out in the sun, you charge it up. The battery will stay charged for 90 to 120 days, even if you don't top it off. But if you remember to keep it charged, you'll always have a backup system in place to keep you going during these times when the power goes out. And it's only going to get worse. I know that every time it gets windy, I realize now they're going to shut off the power. I don't know why they didn't do that for the last 20 years when we had the old poles, which were more vulnerable to windstorms. It may have something to do with this old equipment and infrastructure collapsing and causing fires. I don't know. But all I know is that you can use these devices in these situations. I've picked out a half a dozen or so ones that I found through these forums and on the internet. Brian has the handout back there, and you can take a look, make your own decision. I'm going to buy one of the small ones. I can't really justify the expense of one of the big ones, but it would have kept me from getting in my car and driving 6 miles to the saloon to get an email. I know that seems selfish, but it was really important to me to get that email, so I would have been able to do it with one of these little systems. It's $200, $300, $400. So I'm going to buy one. Do your own research, look around online, but I think it's a good thing. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you much.
Thank you, Alan. And also on this back table here, I brought over a couple of pieces of hardware that we have, just to sort of some examples of backup power that one might have. Something as simple as an inverter you could clip onto your car battery, giving you 110, 20 volt service. I think it's important to always remember to keep have a little backup battery charge that you can keep for your phone available. So there's a couple of options on the back to take a look at. But we're going to break for lunch here in a few minutes, but I wanted to just, before lunch, encourage everyone to, Solar Now is here, and they are, be real interesting to hear what your experience has been with the cliff that solar has fallen off of. We're glad to see that you're here today and still in business. I know that there's been a lot of solar companies that have not been able to weather this storm. So I encourage you to go talk to them and see, talk to Brandon over there and see what sort of options you might have. I'd also like to, we have up here, Kathy is ready to help you if you'd like to join MBCA. We can do it online, and we could use your support to help us as we go forward. There's a questionnaire on your seats. We would very much encourage fill out that questionnaire towards the end of the day and let us know what you think. And there was a question about whether or not, Bernadette, if your PowerPoint would be available, and we will try to put this up on our website so that it will be available to share with people. But with that, let's stop and have a little lunch, and we'll resume a little later with presentation. Is it 12:30? Okay, great. So, saying that way. Okay. Well, it's my pleasure now to introduce Steve Blackledge. Steve is the Senior Conservation Director for Environment America, and looking forward to hearing from him with the State of Environment America's activities. And so, Steve, please come up. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. So fun to be here. So exciting to be here. It's been a while for me. I live up in Northern California in Sacramento, so I don't get down here as often as I should, but now I'm going to come more regularly. Shame on me, exactly, whoever said that. I'm Steve Blackledge. I run the Conservation Program for Environment America, which is a national organization with 30 different state groups, all part of our network, including Environment California, here in California. I'm going to talk a lot about the public lands and wildlife. I'm going to talk about some threats or challenges that we're facing right now. I'm going to talk some about some of the opportunities that we have at the national level in particular, which is interesting to talk about. And some of what I'm going to talk about is national or federal, but it relates, I think, in every case to what we're doing here, what you're doing here, I should say. And in fact, so many of the topics that I have in mind to talk about have come up at least at one point anecdotally in the meeting thus far, so that makes it kind of fun. All right, so next slide. That's me, Environment America. Environment California is our state group. We are very active in a More Nature campaign, in other words, to promote public land conservation, ocean conservation, and wildlife conservation. We're very active at the state level through our state groups and at the national level in Congress, and not just in Congress, but also asking companies and corporations and businesses to take action where it makes a whole lot of sense to take action to protect our environment and to protect wildlife, to protect our environment and protect wildlife. All right, next, let's talk about chuckwalla. You all know this better than me. So I don't have to say anything, but here's what I'm going to say. This is great that it happened. It is the largest contiguous protected area of land in the lower 48. That is super exciting. It is such a great thing for wildlife and wildlife corridors. Someone, I think it was Steve, already mentioned that earlier today when he was speaking. It's a huge victory. Oh, by the way, I'm going to have lots of photos of animals because that makes me happy, and I think it'll make all of you happy too. It was an on-the-ground local organizing effort from groups like yours, and others who are even, right in the space of where the Chuckwalla Monument is. The role that we played, and secondary to what you did, by all means, is to, when it was getting closer and looking like it could happen, is to come in and help organize statewide support and to help organize national support for this thing. So it was an effort to add value to what you were doing here locally by getting organizations signed on to letters aimed at the President Biden and his administration, aimed at members of Congress to build the support broader beyond the local monument discussion into a statewide discussion and a national discussion. And I said we'd talk about threats or challenges and opportunities. In a funny way, this is a bit of a threat, right? Because it happened so recently and we have a new administration. And a new administration, President Trump was not kind to national monuments in his first term. If you remember, there was the Bears Ears National Monument in Utah, Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in Utah. He shrank the borders of both. And then there is a national monument off the coast of Massachusetts called Northeast Canyons and Seamounts National Marine Monument. And what he did there is he changed what was allowed. So previously, no commercial fishing was allowed in that national monument in the ocean, and he changed it so that commercial fishing was allowed, which by and large defeated the reason why the monument was created in the first place. So we have a new administration coming in. I think, and I think Chuck Walla is in good shape as it relates to this. I hope you all do too. I was talking to some of you ahead of time. I think the administration will be looking at the same monuments in Utah and the same one off the coast of Massachusetts because he changed those monuments. President Biden came in and restored them to the way they were. And so I think President Trump will be looking at them again. So those three make us nervous. But then I also think the other potential threat are the most recently created or the most recent actions of the President Biden and his administration. And of course, that's where Chuck Walla matters because it was finalized in January, this month. So I think one of the best things you all can do is continue to cheerlead isn't maybe the right word, but continue to just speak up about how great this place is and how exciting it is. I think one of the reasons why I'm hopeful that it will endure and not become a target is because there is a lot of local support for this thing. And I think that support combined with people continuing to become more aware of the monument will help prevent any sort of new administration taking aim at it. So that's Chuck Walla, and that I put in the threat or challenge category. Next slide. To build off of this morning's conversation on solar, my organization at the national level and at the state level does a lot of work on solar and definitely prioritizes rooftop solar. We wrote a report called The Environmental Case for Rooftop Solar Energy. It can be found at environmentcalifornia.org. And there's a lot of information in it, and if you want to dig deeper, please go check out the report. I have three of the a lot of ones and a two. Originally, I promise, as Bernadette is my witness, they did have different numbers, but okay. So number one, obvious thing is rooftop solar does not change existing land uses. So that's great for desert ecosystems, but that's also important for like agricultural land and keeping agricultural land, keeping it as a farm, fragile habitats and areas. So it does not change those things. And prioritizing rooftop solar in a built environment then ultimately protects these areas. And it's consistent with the goals that we have in California and at the national level. So it's completely consistent with a 30 by 30 goal. And I think you all know what that is, but the idea is protecting and saving 30% of nature by the year 2030, which might turn into a 50 by 50 goal at some point, getting up to 50% by 2050. And these are goals that are set in benchmarks set not by political activist groups like mine, but by scientists who have called for this. And I'm sure people know the name E.O. Wilson. He's one of the people who kicked off this idea of half Earth. We got to just set aside half of the Earth if we're going to make sure we as a species that we endure and last, and that other species do as well. So one is it protects these areas. Two, and the flip side of that is that because rooftop solar is installed in a built environment, it reduces the need for utility scale solar. And that's really critical. And by built environment, I think you all know what I mean, but in fact, people were talking about it, I heard during break, but parking lots and church roofs and home roofs, and all of that is a built environment. The likelihood of finding an endangered species that only lives on shingles, and that is its habitat that has to be preserved, the likelihood of that is that much. So it's just, that's not the reality. So that's why the built environment is so critical, point number one, but yet number two, is that's why it's so critical. And then the third number one is that, and someone actually brought this up, you did, in the conversation earlier today, that the electricity is being used right where it's being consumed. Bernadette talked about that as well. And that is so valuable from the perspective of the poles and the wires for a couple reasons. Sparks that can cause fires, but also those poles and wires have an effect on the environment too, because you're cutting right across natural landscapes. And so for all these reasons, we are gung-ho on prioritizing rooftop solar and over utility scale solar. At the very bottom, you see FedEx and Walmart. One of the things we're doing, in addition to state level campaigns to prioritize rooftop solar, but we're also running campaigns to persuade, like the Walmarts of the world, the Targets of the world, some of the FedExes of the world, and their huge warehouses, to persuade them or pressure them or some combination, but it starts with persuasion, but to persuade them that their roofs are the perfect places to put up solar. They're flat, they're big, they should go big on rooftop solar at these places. If you go to our websites, you'll find actions that you can take to call on Walmart to do that. There are other threats. There are many other threats, and I'll just touch upon one that there's no slide for. All of the endangered species that were added to the endangered species list as either threatened or endangered, or that critical habitat was designated in the last presidential administration. All of those have a target on their back with the new Congress and the new administration. And so that's something that we'll be looking out for. So every species that was added to the list, there will be a bill in Congress 80% of the time to take it off the list. Or there will be language added to a funding bill that says that the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife Service shall not go forward with its plan to protect the lesser prairie chicken, or whatever it may be. That's a real animal, and it exists in the Midwest. All right, the final point I have, sorry, and I missed this, but it's number 2, so I should have seen that, is the speed of installation, which matters. Like, some people will argue that the reason we do big utility scale solar out in the desert is because it's fast. We can put it up fast, one big place. But the reality has proven otherwise. You have to have permits. You have to go through a process. What is going up fast right now, or has been, is rooftop solar in California and elsewhere. And so the speed at which we can add solar in California, if we invest in rooftop solar, is much faster than the utility scale solar. So that's the final reason why we should prioritize rooftop, is it can happen fast. And if you care about global warming, and I think we all do, and care about clean air, that's the place to lean in, is rooftop solar. Okay, next slide. Now we're going to get into some opportunities, and this is one of my favorite: wildlife crossings. So here's a picture of a wildlife crossing, and I actually don't remember which one this is. This might be one up in Washington State. I don't think it's the one up in Canada near Banff. But these things are so cool. And the idea is you're building these over roads or under them, and there's other examples, but to allow animals to migrate safely and move safely. I have another picture on the next slide. So here's an interesting species of wildlife. Bunch of humans, and that was us. This is Environment Virginia, one of our state groups, and we're with Congressman Beyer, and he's in the back row, kind of to the right. And we're touring a culvert, of all things, but it's a culvert built for wildlife in Virginia. And so they're not all those spectacular bridges over top the highways. Oftentimes, they are a culvert, and this is a very large one. They're not all this big, culvert under highways. And then the next slide will show a type of wildlife crossing that is also very cool, which is just, see that fencing off to the left there? The idea is, and Wyoming has done a lot of this, is that they have a lot of east-west highways, and they have pronghorn that migrate north and south, and as well as other species. And the challenge for them is, can we afford and could we afford wildlife bridges or tunnels over every one of those state highways? They invested in something far cheaper, and it's so far proving to work, which is fencing that guides the animals only to cross in one spot. And you kind of go, wait a second, that spot is going to be like Slaughter Central, right? But the other thing that they do then is they put rumble strips and flashing lights and signs in those spots to slow the traffic down. And humans, just like other animals, we sort of learn these things and over time learn that, okay, this is the place to slow down. And so this has worked in Wyoming too. So there's all types of wildlife crossing. I should note that fencing can be a problem for wildlife and their migration too in many ways, but in this case, fencing is used to guide them to the correct place to cross the freeway or the highway. Why support wildlife crossings? Let's go to the next slide. Bernadette and I had dinner with a nephew last night who's not, his head isn't in the environmental space, and that's fine. But he's like, why haven't we been doing this all along? Like, it makes so much sense, right? And that's so true. And so, because when you start to list out why do this, okay, 1 to 2 million species, or critters, I'm sorry, are killed in wildlife collisions each year. 26,000 humans are injured, 200 roughly human deaths per year from collisions with wildlife. There's 8 billion in property damage, mostly in the autos themselves. And then to get into more of the ecology type argument is that there's overall across this country and the world, there's a decline in populations of so many species that may not yet be on the endangered species list and may not be threatened yet, but there's the decline. And insects, birds, reptiles, et cetera, we're seeing this, and it has scientists alarmed. And habitat and loss of habitat is most frequent, one of many, but most frequently pointed to. And then what we're doing with our roads is we're carving up the habitats of critters, and they can't move across Interstate 10, because they just won't, they're smart enough not to do it, or they do it and they get hit. And so we're carving up their habitats in sections, islands that are too small to really support the species in terms of hunting, mating, and all that the species needs to do. And so wildlife crossings are a way to reconnect these fractured habitats and allow animals space to roam. The most famous example here in the California is the P-22, the mountain lion in Los Angeles, and they're building a new bridge near Agora Hills, the Annenberg Wildlife Crossing Bridge. And that was inspired by a mountain lion that had successfully somehow crossed several freeways to end up in Griffith Park in LA. All right, next slide. What's delightful about this is it doesn't fall yet into any sort of partisan bickering, wildlife crossings, and that's why it's in the opportunity phase. It's not a red issue, it's not a blue thing, it's not a Republican thing, it's not a Democrat thing. So people who support this would include people who build roads, because then they get to actually build the tunnels underneath or the bridges over top. They like it. The workers in the unions who work on the road building crews, they love it. Auto insurance companies like this, right? Fewer collisions with elk. My goodness, that'll do damage to a car. People who just sort of like, not environmentalists, but just sort of pragmatists, like that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, build a road, you should build a space for a crossing for an animal to get across. Environmentalists, obviously, and then the general public. We're starting to do a survey right now, and we're going out into rural parts of the state and the country to survey people on what they know about and what they think about and whether they like wildlife crossings. These places that we typically are doing, so far have been doing the surveys, don't lean left, for sure. And the overwhelming feedback in our survey so far has been everybody supports wildlife crossings. We even asked a question of, have you hit a large animal? And we asked this question up near Weed, California, where they're building a bridge for elk and deer to cross. And I mean, it was staggering how many people said yes to that, too. Have you hit a large animal in your life? So people just get it. It's intuitive. Okay, and lawmakers support it, and they've provided money. But here's where the next few years will play out and be really interesting. In the bipartisan infrastructure deal of 2020, which was bipartisan, in Congress, there was $350 million for wildlife crossings. Will that money be in the next transportation bill? And will it be ideally more than that? And that's our hope, that this becomes just a part of the process. You build roads, you build crossings, the two go hand in hand always. But it's going to take more money. And one of the things that's going to help lawmakers understand that $350 million wasn't enough is if states and communities and groups continue to clamor for and push for specific crossings. If the demand is overwhelming for this, lawmakers in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party will see that this is needed and wanted, and they'll put money in the next bill, or should, and put more money in it. And then states have replicated too. So many states have funding for wildlife crossings, including California. A lot of states have done this. The money often runs out. So again, the more that there's a need for and that people are clamoring for, and even DOT agencies at the state level are clamoring for it, the more that Congress will continue to put money into this program. Next slide. I'm going to move on to another opportunity. So wildlife crossings is one, wildlife corridors is another. Very related issues, but and a crossing would be a type of corridor, but think of it like this way. As the monarch butterfly migrates from where it winters down in Mexico, the eastern population, all the way up into through the states, up into the Midwest, even some get up into Canada, there needs to be habitat for them all along their migration path. Think of it too for ducks, and as they migrate, or the example I gave earlier, the pronghorn in Wyoming. These animals and critters have their migration routes and paths. Some have been cut off by our cities and our roads, but they have their paths. We need to be making sure that they can continue to safely migrate, and that can play a huge role in reducing or stopping a dramatic drop in species and populations. So there's a bill, and the primary proponent of it in the U.S. Senate is our own Senator Alex Padilla. It's his bill. In the last Congress, he worked with a North Dakota Republican, John Hoeven. They haven't reintroduced it yet this year. I don't know if it'll be Senator Hoeven again, but Senator Padilla is very committed to making it bipartisan again. And in the House of Representatives, it's Ryan Zinke from Montana. Some of you may know that name. He was President Trump's Secretary of the Interior. He was more challenging, actually, in that role than he has been as a congressperson, where he's been better. So he's got the bill along with Don Beyer, who was one of the people standing in the culvert in Virginia that I showed you earlier. It's, number one, studying and mapping the migration patterns and the movement patterns of wildlife. Number two, developing a plan then to conserve habitat and protect habitat along the migration route, whether that's planting milkweed along the route of the butterfly, or whether it's grazing land for the pronghorn, or whatever it may be. And then the third thing is getting federal agencies and state agencies to all work together. So getting the Department of Transportation to work with the Department of Agriculture to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Getting them all working together on understanding the migration of wildlife and having plans to deal with it. Once you start thinking about the things humans have built, and we've been great at building things over the years, and you start thinking about wildlife migration, you can't stop seeing like, well, how in the world are species supposed to cross that road? Or look at those fences, like there's no way they can move around. And so I think part of this will be helpful too in getting all of us as people, but decision makers too, to sort of undo the thinking or what's in our brains about like, how do we build our communities and our lives? How do we build our fences? How do we build our cities? How do we build our suburban areas so that wildlife are part of the plan from the get-go and retroactively making them at least a little bit part of the plan too. So this is a big opportunity too. It's bipartisan. There's no guarantees it's going to move, but I'm hopeful that it will in this coming year, and we'll be working to do that through our state groups and through our DC office. And then the next slide, I just wanted to insert the Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep, but it relates. A, it's beautiful, and one of my favorite animals, and then B, it relates to the next slide, which is the other opportunity is just a bill in Congress that gives money to the states. It's the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. It is also very bipartisan. So in the Senate, it's Senator Martin Heinrich from New Mexico, and he's teamed up with Tom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina. The House is a little trickier. It used to be bipartisan in the House, but the Republican was kicked out because he had some ethics problems. And so now it's just Debbie Dingell, and then there's Bruce Westerman is a Republican from Arkansas who chairs the committee this would go through, and he has his own alternative bill. So things are a little messier in the House. So we'll talk about the Senate right now. But the bills would do the same thing. So it's money. It's money. It's money for state wildlife agencies and territories and tribes to implement something every state has, which is called a state wildlife action plan. Every state has done one of those. All the states are going to do a new version in 2025, so it's top of mind for state wildlife officials. Through their plans, they've identified more than 12,000 species that are of greatest conservation need, is sort of the lingo that they use, but not necessarily on the endangered species list, not threatened or endangered, but a species that is in need of conservation efforts in their state. So an example might be bison in Montana isn't on the endangered species list, but in Montana they're having some problems, and state wildlife officials have said, hey, this is a species we want to, a creature, we want to do more to conserve and protect and recover. The idea of the bill in part is it's more going to see your doctor. Like the idea of this is more going to see your doctor, not waiting for the emergency room, not waiting till a species is on the cusp of extinction before the state or before the government takes action, but starting to see when an animal species is declining and putting money and attention toward that species right off the bat to keep that from happening. Doug Burgum is the governor of North Dakota. He's the Trump nominee for Secretary of Interior. Senator Martin Heinrich did a wonderful job of asking him a question when he was just recently last week at a hearing before Senator Heinrich's committee. And he asked him about this bill, and Burgum, I'm sure, was prepped, right? I don't think it was a gotcha moment, but he said, I haven't met someone who flies into North Dakota and cares more about the air, the soil, the fish, the wildlife than the people we have at the state level. And that's sort of one of the talking points, and one of the reasons why I think it is so bipartisan is this bill injects the money at the state level, and number one, and it's for, I could say for better or worse, but it's all for worse. The Endangered Species Act has just become contentious, and the Republican Party in particular has been had it a bullseye on it, and the idea of protecting species before they need the Endangered Species Act to kick in, that has a lot of resonance with Democrats and Republicans both, but in particular with Republicans. So the combination of trusting the state people and not, the feds, and protecting species before they need the Endangered Species Act, that has a lot of resonance and traction, and one of the reasons it gives me hope. In the first Trump administration, President Trump signed a really important conservation bill called the Great American Outdoors Act. And I bring it up here because I think it's a bit of a model for how we might get some of these bills through, which is they're bipartisan, and some of these Republicans and Democrats, but some of these Republicans want to have conservation victories to go before their vote if they're up for re-election. Democrats too, but Republicans want these conservation victories for their voters. And with the Great American Outdoors Act, there were a couple who really came to President Trump's office regularly and said, give us this, give us this. And President Trump did. He not only signed it, but he actually spoke to the press about the need for the bill to get to his desk. So I think that's a bit of a model for how we might do that here, because again, some of the Republicans supporting these bills, they care about the issue, but they also care about their reelection, and they know their constituents care about conservation, so they want the bills to get to the president's desk. So that's our hope with some of these. All right, and the final slide. I don't want to pretend like there aren't countless opportunities at the state level and at the local level too. Just given what I do and what I work on, I focused on some of these federal and congressional issues that have real relevance here in Southern California too. But of course, there are so many opportunities, and that's why it's so great that your organization exists and why you're all active in it and come to these meetings, because there are so many more opportunities, I think, at the local level and at the state level. And the final point I wanted to make was just, one could say that given the attacks that may come to our environmental laws and some of our bedrock laws, we should put all of our energy into defense and stopping threats. And some energy certainly has to go in that direction. But I would argue we absolutely have to be on our front foot some of the time. We have to have a proactive agenda a good part of the time, because it, among other things, it allows us to win new things, but it also, I think, gives us new opportunities to win over Americans and their hearts and minds toward caring about the environment, toward wanting to be involved, and that's going to be so useful for everything from defending attacks on the environment to actually winning these new policies, whether it's this year, next year, or the year after that. So that's what I have on public lands, wildlife, threats, and opportunities.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes.
A question and a comment first, and then a question. I wanted to mention to everybody, let's see, remind myself of. Who are you? I'm Lorraine. Been on the board for quite a few years, and happy to do so. For a really great read about wildlife crossings, you probably know where I'm going, I really enjoyed this book. It's called How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of Our Planet by Ben Goldfarb. And it was entertaining. I learned more about animals. It went over wildlife crossings, successful ones. It was just such a good read. You know, sometimes our environmental books are a little dry and maybe you can't get through the whole book or something, but this was a really enjoyable book. So the author's name is Ben Goldfarb. You can just Google Wildlife Crossings book and it'll come up. The question is, back to the rooftop solar and convincing people like FedEx and Target and whatnot, are there groups that have done the math to prove to them that it would be a cost saving? If we're going to, as with the utilities, if we're trusting them to do the numbers, and they're against it, they're not going to come up with numbers that are going to support it. So I just wondered, as with the other, wherever Bernadette is, as with the economist who did crunch those numbers, is there somebody doing that?
There is, and it's not me. Am I still live? Can you hear me? Yeah. There is, and it's not me. So, but I think there's a couple arguments. One is the cost savings, for sure, for them. Two is we're not trying to pressure them per se. We're not like going to have a tone of angry at them, but we do want to show them that their customers too would be really excited to know if they did this thing. So we're trying to make a couple points. One is, yeah, the money, but two is like, this is good PR for you as well. And that's perhaps easier with a Walmart or a Target than, say, a FedEx, because customers, we don't go right into the FedEx, although we do receive packages, but yeah. Yeah. Oh, and then Goldfarb spoke to us a while back, and he was delightful in person too. And I'll see if that video is available and maybe share it for you guys as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Stacy Doolittle again with NBCA, and thank you, Steve, for your presentation. This is more just a little bit about your organization. How many people work for your organization?
Environment America nationally a little over 200.
Okay.
In California, 20-something.
Okay.
We have offices in Sacramento, LA, and in the Bay Area.
Okay, well, one of the issues that MBCA faces is that there are so many things that we want to focus on, and I'm just wondering, how do you do that? How do you get your arms around, the title Environment America? And if you have any strategies for us as far as really determining what we should be focusing on, because what happens is we are always just reacting. We can't get out ahead of anything and be proactive.
Yeah. There are so many things to choose from. We have a lot of discussions about this, as you can imagine. A little bit for us is what excites the staff. So I'm sure for you, part of it is what excites the board and the members of the organization. What tells the right story? Some environmental issues tell a better story, I think. For example, we right now want to be leaning into the bipartisan story a lot, given how fractured our politics are in this country. And so if we can say this is bipartisan and has support on both sides, we want to do that. And then the third thing we care about quite a bit is just winnability. It doesn't have to be winnable in the next year, but like some issues we can see the path to victory. And some issues are as righteous as they are, they're hard to see. And so we will, and none of these issues by itself is the end all be all, but we care that there is a path to victory as well.
Hello. I'm David Fick. I'm a board member of MBCA for 20 years, and I was president 2008 and 2009. And the fact that you mentioned Walmart brought my attention. In 2008, we got into litigation, CEQA litigation with the current Walmart Supercenter, and we made them put in 250 kilowatts of solar panels on top of their roof. And so, just so you know that MBCA walks the talk. 2010, that was the Walmart. That required a CEQA litigation and settlement. In 2012, Copper Mountain College, I was on the Copper Mountain College COC situation. We induced them to get the shade structures at Copper Mountain College. And then Steve, our current president, has a lot more information on us inducing the Morongo Unified School District to put in $21 million worth of solar panels on shade structures and the schools themselves, 16 schools. It was about a $21 million project. I didn't have too much info on that. Steve can answer anything on that. Also, MBCA was formed fighting a transmission line on the north side of the national park in 1969, and CDC, which April Saul's here somewhere still? Yeah, CDC was formed fighting another transmission line that was trying to go renegade along the backside of the San Bernardino Mountains. And that was 2006 to 2009. They still exist. We still exist, MBCA. But there are initial situations that establish us as, concerned about the environment. So, and now we have an uphill battle because I know by previous statements by our majority of the county supervisors, they don't believe in wildlife linkages.
And congrats on all you've done. And it goes back to that final point, which is while I might have talked a lot about national, federal opportunities as they relate to us, so many opportunities here at the local level. So congrats.
Well, thanks, Steve. With that, I'd like to invite Gary Hunn to come up here. Gary is former executive director of the Mojave Desert Land Trust, and over the holidays, we had an opportunity to talk to Gary about this whole issue of wildlife crossings, and Gary has some exciting news to share with us.
Yeah, we need some good news right now, don't we? I got together with Steve socially, and then after that, he called me in advance of this meeting and told me about Steve's presentation, and I had told him about a promising development that's occurred as it relates to connectivity, and I knew part of the presentation would be on that today, so I thought it would be a good time to share with you some positive developments that are occurring with connectivity across Highway 62. So I want to emphasize that it's early days, and we've been working in the background with Caltrans on this issue, Mojave Desert Land Trust, and we haven't gone public yet because we're not ready to. You know, it's not time to mount a campaign of support, and I'll explain that in a second. So, but there will be an opportunity to do that hopefully very soon. So, anyway, in 2021, Caltrans commissioned a wildlife movement study for Highway 62 from the Coachella Valley up through the top of the Yucca grade. And it was performed by Dudek, a consultant that does a lot of environmental consulting in Southern California, by the UC Davis Road Ecology Center, and another group. And a number of recommendations came out of that study. And one of those recommendations was the construction of 2 wildlife overpasses over Highway 62, one on the Yucca grade and one on the Morongo grade. And so MDLT had been involved in wildlife collision issues, so Caltrans was talking with us about this study, and we provided them access to some land that we own and, provided support. And so they sent us a copy of the study. And when we saw those recommendations, we felt that we should get involved in trying to make those overpasses a reality. So Cody Hanford, our deputy director of MDLT, and I have been working with Caltrans to prepare an application for a planning grant to do the planning for those highway overcrossings. And you may have heard, and I'm guessing everyone in this room, at least I hope so, voted in favor of Proposition 4, the climate bond. Well, I want to let you know that, if you don't know already, that $180 million of that bond is earmarked for linkage, for crossings at wildlife linkages. We will be eligible to compete for about $100 million of that. We won't need that much to build these crossings. But we'll be eligible for that pot of money. So I've been working on preparing what's called a pre-application for a planning grant that we hope to submit very soon. And then we anticipate that we will likely be invited to prepare a full planning grant. I've talked with Cal Fish and Wildlife's representative for this area about a year ago. They actually added to California Department of Fish and Wildlife's budget. They have 8 positions now in the state that are focused just on connectivity keeping habitat connected. And the person that is responsible for our area, Cody and I had a phone call with him, and he is very supportive of building these 2 overpasses and said, let us know what we can do to help. So I've also met with the head of that program at the Wildlife Conservation Board in Sacramento, and he also thinks it's a good project. So I think we have a great opportunity to get this funding, at least to get the planning done, and hopefully to actually build the structures. So many of you are familiar with the issue. You know, a number of animals have been killed on the Yucca and Morongo grades, you know, ranging from small mammals to mountain lion. It's a really big deal, and I know folks in the Morongo Valley are very concerned about it and have even put up their own signs, you know, warning motorists of the potential for collisions with wildlife, and particularly where those big concrete center dividers are that are called Jersey walls. The one on the Yucca grade, most of it is 56 inches high, you know, 5.5 feet tall, and animals just aren't even attempting to cross anymore, and those that do often don't have very good luck doing so. So Highway 62 bisects, and many of you may know this, but it bisects the San Bernardino Mountains, the main San Bernardino Mountains and the little San Bernardino Mountains. So as Steve was talking about, it fragmented 2 huge areas of habitat, but it goes beyond that. You know, conservation biology, the whole idea is to develop an interconnected system of core reserves. Okay, we're successful. Many of us worked, including this group, on the campaign to designate the Chuckwalla National Monument. What an incredible victory for the environment, right? But think about it, all the way from almost Mexico to Canada goes interconnected, or hopefully soon interconnected, core areas connect all the way from Mexico through Chuckwalla, through Joshua Tree National Park, to the San Bernardino Mountains, San Gabriel Mountains, Tehachapi's, on up through the Sierra Nevada and the Cascades to Canada. So this particular spot right here in our backyard is incredibly important to that connectivity that goes far beyond our area, but is very important to Joshua Tree and the San Bernardino Mountains. And the Sand to Snow National Monument actually goes across Highway 62 in 2 locations, and there are modeled habitat linkages in those locations, and that's where we're proposing to put those overpasses. So just wanted to see if there's anything else I was leaving out. Oh, so species-wise, to give you an idea, Steve was talking about fragmentation of habitat and how that can cause declines of wildlife populations. One of the main reasons why that happens is because, think about mountain lions. Some of their larger home ranges are like 120 square miles. The smallest one ever documented was P-22s in Griffith Park. Okay, so they can sometimes occupy smaller areas, but the bottom line is they need very big areas for each mountain lion. And a male mountain lion won't tolerate another male in its territory, so will tolerate females. So our mountain lion populations on either side of the highway are 2 different distinct populations that are part of what's called an evolutionarily significant unit of mountain lions that is a candidate for listing, for state listing right now. And so those populations are both so low that they run the risk of things like inbreeding depression, which impacts their fitness and their ability to survive. So this crossing is very critical for mountain lion in particular, but they're emblematic of its importance to all different wildlife species. And plant propagules go across crossings too and keep plant diversity in good shape as well. So, I feel very optimistic that we have an opportunity here to get this done. It's going to take some real effort, and I'm working as the project manager on it with Cody, and we're going to be meeting with our counterpart at Caltrans again very soon, and I will have some more news which I can share at one of the MBCA board meetings. So, and I just wanted to say that, the reason we've been quiet about it, we've been working quietly in the background until we really had something solid that people could rally around. Well, once we get a planning grant, at that time or sometime shortly thereafter, then we will want to start to build grassroots support, and that's what will be coming to our partners, to MBCA and other local partners, to campaign to build support just like we did for the National Monument. Thanks for your time. Thanks for fitting me in, Steve.
Thanks so much, Gary. We're excited to have this some positive good news. A couple of things, a couple of questions I wanted to just follow up on. First of all, Steve was talking about one of the advantages, or about the advantages of rooftop of not changing land use with the construction of rooftop solar. It occurred to me immediately, what about either fallow farmland, or even more importantly, what about farmland that is no longer viable due to, for instance, there's parts of the Central Valley, I think, that have so much salt that they're no longer can really be grown. So it is a change of land use, but it's sort of after the use of the land as for what it had been used previously is no longer viable. So that's something. So I don't know, do you have any insight on that, Steve, that you'd like to share with us? Is that okay? The other, I also wanted to talk about over lunch here today, was talking with, and we've had some other anecdotes on this, in talking about the effect of the Joshua Tree, Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act, and what it is doing. We, of course, being an environment here that has, we're home base for Joshua trees. What does this mean to water companies? I know it's very difficult because water companies and utility companies, because getting entitlement to do improvements, like, for instance, improving, constructing a wastewater plan is going to require necessarily digging into the ground. And with Joshua trees everywhere, this creates a problem, a bit of a conflict. So it's something that I think really needs some more study to understand just what's happening, or even just improving some water systems, and not necessarily for waste improvement, but if to put in a new water line, boy, how do you do that? And do all utilities, is everybody being held to the same standard on that? For instance, when a road is plowed, that technically is ground disturbance. So that is a different standard being applied to different entities for compliance with this? It seems like that's something that should perhaps be understood. And for Bernadette, I wanted to ask you briefly, what about the idea of, we talked briefly about this with the hurricane in North Carolina. There were quite a few power outages there. The infrastructure was destroyed. So a sort of portable rooftop solar system, a rooftop distributed solar system, has gained a lot of traction. I think it's called Footprint, is that one? Which, I don't know, if Bernadette, if you might have anything to say about that, I'd love to hear that. And lastly, while Bernadette's up here, Janet, could you by any chance cue up that slide, just to sort of have it up here, that slide about Patty Poppy's love letter? That, to me, really, that was a doozy, and I think if we can get it up, that I think would be really, useful to see that again. It points out the whole.
Yeah. She's the CEO of PG&E. Yeah, I know. I'm sure she's a really sweet human being. Her name seems fake, but yeah. So actually, Steve, on your first thing about farms, what's really interesting is one of our biggest customers in California for distributed solar is the agricultural industry, our farmers. And that's because their number one expense in operating a farm is electricity. They spend and they use electricity for a number of things, including processing the fruits and the nuts and the other things and keeping produce refrigerated. But then also they use electricity to pump water, well water. And so if you can actually pair solar on site with the farm, you can really reduce their operating costs. So they're actually some of our biggest allies and have helped to keep rooftop solar a bipartisan issue and getting the support in Congress. When they build solar on their property, they look to build it on non-arable land. So either fluvial plains on their property or at land that's no longer arable because of salt issues like you mentioned, or maybe because they don't have access to the amount of groundwater that they used to. And so they naturally make those decisions. There is some Williamson Act dynamics at play that I'm not an expert on, but there's folks working to try to get around that so you can ease the permitting of putting up solar in that way. Farmers don't want to convert arable land to anything if they can help it, so it's a win-win for them. One of the problems with the net metering recent decisions from the Newsom administration is they've greatly reduced the financial viability of solar for farmers. They actually went further than they did for individual homes. They actually really hurt schools and other multi-meter properties. So if you have a property which have multiple buildings on it, a lot of government properties, schools are all like this, farms, they basically said you can't aggregate, you can't put a solar system on one plot of land that, say, is the non-arable part, and then share the electrons with all of the other meters on the property. It has to be one solar system for every meter, which for a farm, that's every pump. And so it's just kind of undoable. And so they gutted that ability to share the energy from one kind of centralized on the distributed, if you follow me, on a school. It's a great example. You can think about it. It's on the parking lot. So you put the solar on the parking lot. You don't have to go and disturb the gymnasium roof and other things. And then you just, on paper, distribute the electrons to the different meters. They gutted the ability to do that. And we had a bill last year, SB 1374, made it all the way to the governor's desk. We had almost a supermajority of support. Everybody thought that's a dumb idea. And the governor vetoed it with the message of the cost shift. So even our public schools that are being crushed by their own electricity bills and are funded by taxpayers, that wasn't enough to get around the cost shift. So anyway, I don't mean to be so negative, but so many of these obvious solutions are being unraveled by this current state that we're in, and we have to get around it. To the second question, now I've forgotten about it. Oh yeah, the Footprint Project, super cool. You should check them out, thefootprintproject.org. They're actually really active right now in Los Angeles. So what they do is they work with my member companies that are the manufacturers, and they get donated solar panels and batteries that are portable. I mean, all the technologies you guys currently have on your roofs are basically portable because solar is super modular, as is batteries. So you can have portable solar and storage systems that provide on-site backup power, or just electricity generation to first responders. So fire teams and pods have electricity for communication on site. And then also they're providing it to families, community centers, and others that need electricity. A lot of times it's a priority is to help somebody on a medical baseline, meaning they have a child, let's say, with respiratory problems and they need to be on an electronic device to sleep at night. They get backup power for when the grid goes down for prolonged periods of time and just while the grid is down during these wildfires. So They're a really cool organization, nonprofit, and supported by a bunch of my member companies. And they're out, and they're not getting the attention, actually, that I think they deserve for providing this critical resource. And they do that in North Carolina, as you mentioned. They do it in Puerto Rico. They go basically wherever there's a big natural disaster. It's kind of this unseen, distributed solar and storage benefit.
Yeah, very exciting, and I could foresee that when the next disaster hits California, that there could be a need for this. So it's a nonprofit, is that right? So this is something that one could support and get the tax benefits from that. Thank you very much. Well, yeah, I just, once again, I thought it was good to kind of look at that last slide just with love, Patty Poppy. Patty Poppy, $17 million a year. Oh boy, with love.
Where'd she come from?
Some non-energy corporate job.
Yeah.
She's the great administrator.
Well, if there any other questions, we still have some time, and I'd love to. Oh, thank you. Yes, and Lorraine said she doesn't want. She has some terrific environmental publications. The Desert Report, I see. That looks like a good one. So there's shared table. And yes, MBCA's our book that we published for our 50th year. Please take one. Yeah, that's still good.
And the battery backup handouts, which are really excellent, are
Good.
back on the bot.
So, yes, please, Bernadette.
Sorry, I know you guys have heard a lot from me today, but I did, in talking with some of you after my presentation, it occurred to me I was remiss in not mentioning something really important, and that is, while I bemoan the changes that the Newsom administration have made, it is still actually a good idea to go solar, and especially add a battery. And the reason, I never explained this very clearly, but because we have stopped the administration from taxing self-consumption, when you go solar, every single electron that you generate in real time and use in real time is of increasing value. So if you go solar today, it is actually more valuable than if you had gone solar 5 years ago, because you're offsetting electricity that is more expensive today. Does that make sense? So the value of your solar panels only go up because the price of the electricity you're not having to buy is going up. So under this sort of net metering 3.0, one simple way to think about it is, if you just simply put up enough solar panels to cover only your on-site usage in real time, like whatever's the maximum amount of electricity you use on a hot day, and it takes, let's say, 5 panels covers that, that would be really good investment, even under NEM 3.0, because the net metering has nothing to do with it. It's just self-generation. It has nothing to do with what you export back to the grid and the credit you get for it. The brilliant thing about net metering, when we invented it in 1995 here in California, is that you can oversize and cover your annual load, so the electricity used in the day and at night, and get a credit by sharing it with your neighbors, and that you can be kind of a net neutral, customer, and you can save more money through that credit. But net metering 3.0 basic said, we don't want your exports anymore. They're not worth anything. So we just want you to self-consume. So you can add a battery, and you can build a bigger system than what you can use in real time, right? So while the sun is shining, maximize your self-consumption. A lot of us have heat pumps or electric cars, absorb all of that self-generated electricity, and then ideally you can also store it in a battery. And if you do that, then they can't touch us. Like, they can't get at the economics. Yeah, you own it, and you are protected from those ridiculous rate increases and profiteering, by the utilities. they're going to keep trying to come after us. And this is why, like, NEM 3.0, as horrible as it was, it still is not going to totally keep us down. Like, we will keep going. And we'll keep going because we offer that self-independence, that self-consumption, and the battery makes that even more valuable. So as you think about yourself, as you talk to other people, and people are like, I shouldn't, try to help explain that. Like, it's like rainwater. If you have a rainwater catch, basin on your property, every time it rains, your plants are getting it and you're capturing it. That is all really, really good, and they can't touch that. Did you have a question there?
Well, I wanted to mention, like, what SE does with their time of use from 4 to 9. That's like the gas company charging from 5 to 8 in the morning and 5 to 8 at night, and they said, hey, we're going to charge you $8 for you guys' gasoline per gallon versus the rest of the day, right? So what you do is you hedge your system, combating against that 4 to 9. You save that storage, pull from there, versus saying, hey, you know what, we're just going to automatically just go solar without storage, and we're just going to continue to consume from those higher rates.
That's right. Yeah, so with a battery, you can be protected not only from the daytime electricity you'd otherwise be using, but you can be protected from the evening and nighttime electricity you would otherwise be using. So it is really good. The downside is just a battery adds a lot of cost. But the federal tax credit, the 30% federal tax credit, which hopefully nothing happens to that, that applies to the cost of the battery and the solar system. Right here in front.
When I did the application for my solar system, part of the way that I was allowed to put these on our roof was, you have to submit your history of power usage. And that it's tied to, after that's in the application, they tell you, Edison tells you how many solar panels you can put on your roof. So if the net metering goes away, can you oversize your system? Was that what's keeping it down, is the net metering?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people, if you've gone through the process, you realize that you can't generate more electricity than you use. So the net metering program is capped, the size of each individual system, which really annoys some people because they're kind of like, why not just use my whole roof? I'll cover my electricity usage and my neighbors, and I'll just make my thing an ecological little haven, right? And huh? Yeah, like a microgrid, right? When it's, like I said, it's the most community of community solar, right? Our net metering law says no, you have to only size your solar system for what your home needs in a given year. And the utilities have always fought that, but we've kept that pretty set. What you can do now, if you want to, is you can do a non-export solar and storage system. It is not on net metering at all because it doesn't export. Net metering only exists because you get to spin the meter backwards and get a bill credit. That's all net metering is. Net metering doesn't own self-consumption, it doesn't encompass all of rooftop solar. So with a battery, and if you have an existing system under NEM 1 or NEM 2, you can keep that intact, keep your NEM contract for the 20 years from when you first connected it. You can add a parallel system on your property. If you have the roof space, you can add more solar panels that are directly connected to a battery, and it's not net metering. It never exports. So it's the equivalent of just turning off the lights and not using Edison's electrons. You can do that right now, and it can be a game changer for a lot of people because it protects your net metering. You don't have to touch that system, and you add it in parallel. And you're protected against, I think you guys all understand this, like, depends on how you've configured your solar and storage system, but when you add that battery, it can be wired to provide backup power. And so when the lights go out, you have a seamless supply of electricity. We have one of these at our homes. We don't have as many blackouts where we live, but they do happen. We don't even know when there's a blackout. Our neighbors will be like, oh, the electricity's out. And we're just like, oh, we didn't notice. So it's really great. You don't have to go outside in your garage and flip a switch. It is seamless, and it provides a lot of peace of mind.
How many of us in the room are setting this example?
I think we showed earlier, it was like 60% of you, yeah. Yeah, but I think you guys are all the folks out in the community that other people will talk to, so that's why it's good to kind of go through this detail. No, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, so most of us have had a solar system for a little bit, and it's based on our own district. But now that we're trying to electrify our transmission, how do will they let us upsize if we have electric?
So if you had, you used, 100 widgets of electricity 5 years ago, and you sized your solar system, and you're on NEM 2.0, and you sized it to that 100 widgets of electricity, you are locked into that. You don't want to modify. If you make too big, you can make a small modification, like one extra panel, but if you make two, you can add a battery without changing your net metering contract, but you can't, increase the size a lot, even if your load has increased because you've added an electric car. But you can do this separate system that's parallel, yeah. Anything to add?
Yeah, so I wanted to mention that I think a lot of people assume that solar is expensive, but they do have other options. Lenders have other options, what are known as like power purchase agreements that allow you guys for no upfront cost to get solar. And what that does is they try to mitigate away from what SCE is currently at, and they try to come in about 40 to 50% lower. And what that does is they do have an annual increase of an escalator, but they put you so far back as far as the SCE or the utility continues to grow, they just grow much slower and way behind. So it's not utilizing so much of your guys' upfront capital.
Yeah, there's 3 different ways to finance a solar system. You can do a power purchase agreement where the company owns the solar panels on your roof, and you buy the electricity from them at a reduced price. That's one way, and the upside of that is you could literally have no money to put into solar, and you could still solarize your home, and it provides some protection from rising rates and immediate lowering of your bill. The second is you can there's a lease product, there's also just loans. So you can take out a loan to pay for the cost of the system, and then obviously you could just buy it out cash.
Can I build for that?
Somewhat, yes. You, I forget the exact rules, but you can prove to the utility that you are going to increase your load because you're about to buy an EV, but you have to do it within a certain period of time and then prove it. So you have to really, really do it. Otherwise, you put yourself in jeopardy. But there is some amount that you can oversize. Otherwise, you have to wait. It's a little bit of a catch. I mean, it's a little bit of a stupid backwards thing. You have to buy your EV, wait to increase your load, and then have a year's worth of increased load if you want to kind of do it the most simple way. They make it hard. Yeah. But batteries are a game changer, and this is why, I guess to end on a slightly positive note, you can't, like I said earlier, you can't keep a good idea down. And generating electricity from the sun, I mean, we invented this amazing technology. It's like magic, right? We can make electrons in the most reliable way possible by just using our most abundant resource. And we now we've been able to put it into a battery, lead acid. A lot of you guys have lead acid batteries. They're good. They're, we know how they work. They don't last quite as long as lithium. And so we're making this transition to lithium, which lasts longer, but is more expensive right now than lead acid, but those prices are going to come down. They can't keep us down. They can try. And my goal as an environmentalist isn't so much that I'm worried about solar becoming like an endangered species. I don't think it ever will. I don't think they can ever really control the sun. But what I'm worried about is the speed at which we're transitioning, and also the speed at which we are helping consumers pay for energy. And like those two things have a time component to them, and that's what I think we should be so alarmed about, is we have all of these problems stemming from the way in which you generate energy and deliver energy, and we're not really fixing that problem in a timely manner. But you can't keep us down. Like, we're going to keep growing, and the more all of us stay positive and support that message of don't give up, don't let them keep us down, we're gonna get through this sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernadette. That is a great recap. I just wanted to point out here that I put quite a bit of effort into getting Edison to show up. First of all, it took me the longest time to make any contact with him whatsoever, and ultimately they declined to come. But we did ask them to come because we wanted to get, we thought that would be appropriate to have them here. We didn't go so far as to leave the empty chair, but I did want you to know. But, well, thank you all so very much for being here. We really appreciate it. It's just great. Thanks. Please, yeah, I hope you had fun and enjoyed it. And please sign up for our board meetings, and we look for your support for MBCA. So thanks so much.